July 15th, 1976, Chowchilla, California. A day that the town would like to forget forever, yet remains a part of its history. At around 4 p.m., school bus driver Ed Ray was driving 26 students of Dairyland Elementary School home from a summer class trip to the Chowchilla Fairground swimming pool. Ray was described as a humble rancher with a humble day job. Stocky, about 55 years old, a guy you would not want to pick a fight with, a guy who works with his hands and doesn't talk much. On this particular day, Ed's bus was rowdy, but the kids all loved him for his patience and reliability. The kids were all loud and excited after just having spent the afternoon swimming. Some of them were even singing, but when the bus turns onto Avenue 21, Ray sees a white Dodge van blocking the road with its door open. He tries to weave around the empty van when a guy in overalls with a pantyhose covering his face jumps out in front of the bus with a revolver. The man walks to the driver's side window and asks Ed, with no intimidation in his voice, "Would you open the door, please?" Ed opens it. Two more identically dressed figures jump in, one with a rifle which is quickly pointed at Ed. Everybody goes to the back of the bus. The one without a rifle starts to drive, and the one with the revolver hops in the van to follow them. They drive about a mile and park the bus in a bamboo thicket. The entire ride was apparently so silent that it added to the pure horror of it. The bus was hidden near the Chowchilla River, and 12 kids were ushered into the white van that was following the bus. Ray and the other 14 kids got into the back of the second van that was waiting at the location, this one green. There was a partition separating the driver's seat to the back of the van, and all the windows were sealed. Ed and all the kids sat in the backs of these vans for 11 whole hours, in the pitch black and extreme heats, all the while scared for their lives, not knowing what was going to happen next. Some of the older kids started to sing songs to try to lighten the incredibly horrible setting and make the younger kids feel better, songs like "If You're Happy and You Know It." Meanwhile, back in town, it only took 15 minutes after the bus not showing up that parents began to wonder what was going on. That's how punctual Ed always was. Within the hour, the missing bus was being talked about on the local news stations. Parents helped police by tracing the route the bus usually took, and by that evening, they found the abandoned bus. Within hours, 30 FBI agents arrived on the scene, and an intense investigation was underway to find the kids and Ed. Late that night, the vans finally arrive at a rock quarry 100 miles away in Livermore, 3:30 in the morning, at which point Ed had been awake for 24 hours. The back doors of the van swing open and two guys are waiting. Ed is the first one out. He's handed a flashlight and then told to strip and then go down a hole with a ladder in it. Above ground, roll call is being taken for the children, and their names are written as they're made to leave the bus one by one. Then they're stripped and sent to join Ed down the ladder into what was referred to as the hole, which turned out to be an old moving van, which had been placed in a large dugout hole 12 feet underground. Ed immediately worried that the ceiling would cave in or that they'd suffocate. However, there were two air shafts, hoses that ran above ground to a tree. There were also some mattresses on the ground and a pathetic amount of necessities: Wonder Bread, peanut butter, potato chips, water jugs, and some holes carved for toilets. After all the kids were inside, one of the captors said, "We'll be back for you." Then a steel plate slid over the entrance and was weighted down by something. They of course begged to be let out, and many of the younger children screamed. Then they heard repeated thumps on top of the van. They couldn't see it, but their captors were shoveling dirt on top of the van, burying them alive. Panic ensued in the trailer when it was realized what was happening. Ed tried his best to keep everybody calm. Ed and Michael Marshall, the oldest kid in the group, who was 14, started to push at the lid to try and open it, but it was pointless. So by now, Ed instructed everyone to eat and get some rest. 12 hours later, the food was all already consumed, and the ventilation system that was keeping the van cool stopped working, and the hot July air started to fill the tight space. On top of that, the roof of the van started to cave in, and Ed knew time was very limited. The survivors, now adults, recount that around this time, as the walls and ceiling of the van were caving in and there was no food left, that they were starting to realize they wouldn't likely make it out of this alive. Ed and Michael started to pile up the mattresses in the trailer to get to the roof, which had been covered with a heavy sheet of metal and weighted down with two 100-pound industrial batteries. After hours of effort, Ray and Michael wedged the lid open with a piece of wood and moved the batteries. They then dug away the remainder of the debris blocking the entrance. 16 hours after they had entered the van, the group emerged and walked to the quarry's guard shack, where a security guard called the police. Ed and the children were brought to a nearby jail, where they were fed and interviewed by police. So the captors were three men: Frederick Newall Woods, James Schoenfeld, and his brother Richard. Frederick's family owned the quarry that the van was buried at. The three men were finding themselves in financial struggles, so they planned to hijack the bus and demand a $5 million ransom to release the group. The men would flee when they saw the group escaped though, but they were found after a 2-week manhunt. They were found guilty and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012, and James Schoenfeld was paroled on August 7, 2015. Frederick Woods was denied parole 15 times because he owned the quarry. However, in March of this year, he was granted parole as well. Rightfully so, people of Chowchilla and people around the world were sickened at the fact that the three men who committed this kind of monstrous act could ever roam the streets again. If Michael and Ed hadn't stepped up and dug the group out of that van, they likely would not have survived. Ed Ray died at 91 in May 17th of 2012, but he is still to this day remembered as a hero. What you just heard may perhaps be the most well-known near tragedy to happen to a school bus full of children. However, it's a big world, and there are unfortunately many other horrific events that don't end up on the news. Then 14-year-old Donald, who wished to have his last name left out, was a student at a high school in Virginia and a member of the school's band. The bus driver's name was Robert, but everyone called him Bob. Like Ed Ray, he also seemed to enjoy his job and enjoyed the company of the students he drove, albeit these students were a little older. On October 20th of 1995, Bob was driving a class of band students to and from their field trip. Donald was in this bus. The festival they went to ended late at night, around 10, and the drive back to the school where the students would be dropped off was a 45-minute drive away. The bus was on Route 58, a highway that runs through Virginia. Given the rural setting, there were basically no other cars on the road, but even when one car was relatively close to the back of the bus, it wasn't any cause for alarm at first. But when the car would start to tailgate the bus, instead of simply going around it, especially when the bus and the car were the only vehicles in sight, the students near the back of the bus started to realize and discuss amongst themselves how strange it was. Bob the bus driver would switch into the left lane to get the driver off his ass, and all the kids watched as the car floored it past the bus in the right lane. Some kids shouting things out the windows, to which the chaperone on the bus told the kids to knock it off. Donald recalls thinking the car was gone and it was just some aggressive late-night driver, when suddenly the bus slammed on the brakes so hard that everybody was slightly lifted from their seats, and there was an ear-piercing shriek from the brakes. The bus came to a halt on the middle of the highway, and Bob told everyone to remain calm. The bus went into reverse for a few moments, then back in drive to another halt. Bob shouted at everybody on board the bus to keep quiet and don't panic. And hearing those words made Donald, along with his friends he was sitting with, and every other student on the bus whisper amongst themselves nervously. There was shouting from outside the bus from multiple men's voices. Then the bus doors opened, and two men wearing black pullover masks armed with handguns came on board, yelling at everyone on the bus to shut up in response to a few students near the front screaming. One of the men with the guns announced to the entire bus to empty their wallets of all cash and take any jewelry off and to give it to them. They went row to row with their guns pointed at the kids, as each student took out their wallets and placed whatever small amounts of money broke high school students could be carrying in their wallets into the plastic bag the guy was holding, and the girls would take off their jewelry. Some students would scream as the gun was pointed in their faces, which would be a natural reaction for some. Donald described the moment he had a gun pointed at his head at 14 as emotionally traumatizing, that he felt his entire existence would end if he moved or looked at the guy the wrong way. The men didn't even make it to the back of the bus before they decided to leave in a hurry, most likely panicked that other cars would pass by and stop. The car floored it away down Route 58 with its lights off. Its license plates had been covered, indicating it was a planned attack, if the guns and masks weren't already indication enough. Everyone on board made it home okay, just most of the students, as well as Bob and the chaperone, had been robbed. Unfortunately, bus robberies are a common thing though, and while most probably aren't caught on video, what you're about to see was. A school bus traveling along the N4 in Whitbank one Friday night this past February was attacked by armed robbers. The teachers did not know it at the time, but the robbers had laid out rocks on the highway, intending to cause damage to vehicles so that the drivers would stop and the robbers could steal from them at gunpoint. The bus was carrying 4 teachers and the driver. There were no pupils in the vehicle. They were traveling back to the school after an athletics meeting when they hit the rocks and ruptured a tire. There were 3 robbers, 2 were armed with guns and 1 with a knife.
I need phone. Okay. Yes, you can take it. Give me your phone. Why? Give me a phone. Where is that your car?
The assailants stole cell phones, cash, jewelry, and a smartwatch. The bus driver was hit in the face with a gun and sustained a minor jaw injury, but that was the only injury. The robbers then fled the scene, and eventually a tow truck later pulled over to assist. One of the teachers borrowed the tow truck driver's phone and called her fiancé, who notified the authorities. Police soon arrived, and an investigation began. The robbers have still not been identified. Since buses can carry a lot of people, depending on the intent of the people looking to target them, they may see extra dollar signs just based on the amount of people on board alone. Even though you don't often hear about these things happening on the news, they do happen. In such situations where people are armed with guns, it's always best to just comply with their orders. Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town. My specific neighborhood was about a 20-minute walk from the beach. I'd say about 80% of my personality was beach-related. I've been surfing longer than I've been able to speak, and it would be an anomaly for me to shake out a pair of shoes and not have some amount of sand fall out. My 2 best friends, let's call them Armand and Chuck, were extroverted, outgoing, and charismatic. We were all 18 and very much obsessed with girls. It was a Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before school let out. Senioritis had long since set in, and at this point, my friends and I regularly pushed the limits of how much we could get away with without getting in trouble. We already had our coveted college acceptances, so we didn't really care much about high school anymore. Armand and I had plans to meet up with 2 girls from our high school that we'd been getting along with really well at school. The plan was to pick the 2 of them up in the evening and enjoy a cool, breezy night on the beach. We had blankets and a few bottles of wine, the perfect combinations for stargazing on the beach. I don't condone drinking and driving to any capacity, but I was just a stupid kid. I arrived at Sophia's house just after 9. Her and Fran sort of walk danced to the car. It was clear that they had a little something to drink beforehand. Armand and I exchanged some excited grins. It was going to be a fun night. I took a scenic route to a scenic beach. It was about a 30-minute drive. The whole time, the 4 of us were having a great time in the car, cracking jokes and talking about some mutual friends. At one point, Fran and I were having a very deep philosophical conversation about the nature of time and death and such. We were all very much enjoying each other's company. The specific beach I had chosen had a dirt path that you could drive a car up. From there was a more narrow sand path that we would walk. The path was actually pretty steep, but I had picked it because we were less likely to encounter any other people at such a secluded spot. Furthermore, this beach was further away from the main boardwalk, so the sky would be clearer for stargazing. I thought of everything. I parked my car as far up the dirt road as possible, and the 4 of us hopped out. Armand and I carried the blankets and wine. I'll fast forward through the boring stuff. After a few hours and an empty bottle, Armand and I found ourselves separating. He and Fran walked up the beach, and Sophia and I walked in the opposite direction. After being separated by a decent amount of distance and darkness, I threw my blanket down and we drunkenly fell asleep on top of it. Before anything happened, Sophia tensed up. At first, I thought it was something that I had done, but then she whispered something. "Do you hear that?" I focused my attention and strained my ears, trying to hear something other than the gentle crashing of ocean waves. I assumed she was just drunk. But then, to my surprise, I did hear something. It sounded almost like a whirring, like the sound a small engine would make. The sound seemed to be moving around. I couldn't pin down where it was even coming from. Then it seemed to fade away into nothingness. "It's nothing," I assured her, eager to resume what we had been doing. And that's what we did. Soon after, I fished my shirt from the sand and shook it out before throwing it over my head. Just then, Sophia, who was still lying on the blanket, shrieked. I whipped around to look at her and saw she was pointing up at something. I looked up, but couldn't see anything besides the blackness of the sky. I sat down next to her to get a better angle, and I was horrified. From her point of view, the moon was perfectly aligned with what appeared to be a drone floating directly overhead. It hovered a little while longer before zipping up into the dark sky and disappearing out of sight. It all made sense. That noise that we had heard before was 100% the drone. I got angry at myself for not realizing at the time. I then got sick at the thought of being watched that entire time. I glanced over at Sophia and could tell she had the same exact feeling. She put her head in her hands and started crying. I consoled her as best I could before suggesting we walk back to the car. The two of us made it to the car to find Armand and Fran already there. I quickly explained the situation. The two of them were dumbfounded, and I could feel the joy in the air literally being sucked out. I began driving in silence in the direction of Sophia's house, eventually trying to lighten the mood with some conversation. It didn't work though. The girls agreed that they didn't feel safe going home just yet. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I asked if we could hang out at either of their houses. They both shook their heads, saying their parents wouldn't allow it. My house was off the table for the same reason, as was Armand's. I decided to ask Armand to call up Chuck, which he did. Chuck's house was massive and his parents were super chill. It was honestly the perfect spot. To our delight, Chuck was free. I pulled into Chuck's driveway and parked the car. Armand and the two girls began making their way towards Chuck's front door, and I told them I'd catch up to them in a second. I needed a second to think about everything that had just happened. I was more shaken up than I was letting on, so I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm down a bit. Honestly, those few seconds with my eyes closed really helped. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, which I hadn't even touched since the incident. The screen lit up, and I stared at the single notification that sat on the display. I had to blink a few times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My entire body froze as I stared in horror at the lone notification. AirTag found moving with you. Every emotion that I had just expelled from my body came crashing back. We were literally being tracked. I snapped out of my paralysis and jumped out of the car, examining every inch of the vehicle. Nothing on the front bumper, nothing in the grille, and nothing on the back. I started getting desperate, checking the seats and flipping floor mats. Still nothing. By now, sweat was pouring down my neck, and I could feel the hairs on my arms and legs clamping up. I got on my hands and knees and began examining the underside of my car. I got to the tire on the driver's side and began feeling around the tire well. And there it was. It was literally taped to the underside of the well. Impossible to find if you didn't know what you were looking for. I held the tag in my hand for a few seconds before throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. Whoever had watched us on the beach with that drone knew where we were. I didn't feel safe in Chuck's driveway all alone. I picked up one of the broken AirTag pieces and ran over to Chuck's front door. I told everyone what I had discovered, showing them the AirTag pieces to prove it. They were even more horrified than I was, especially the girls. They checked their phones and saw the same notification. Chuck was particularly pissed off because we had been potentially tracked back to his house. After the panic subsided, we spent the rest of the night in Chuck's basement and ended up sleeping over. A couple weeks passed and nothing happened. Honestly, my friends and I were glad to forget about the whole thing, assuming it was entirely in the past now. The only way we could rationalize it was that some creep wanted to watch some young adults hook up on the beach and track their car to scare them. It was chilling to think about, but we were relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. One Sunday morning, about 3 weeks after the incident, I got a call from Chuck. He screamed through the phone for me to drive to his house as soon as possible, which I did. When I got there, he was standing in his driveway with a concerned look on his face and some paper in his hand. I was confused until I realized what he was holding. They weren't papers, but rather pictures. I examined them more closely. Pictures of me from that night on the beach. They were grainy and dimly lit, but you could clearly see Sophia and I in revealing fashion. I was disgusted. I could only imagine how Sophia would feel upon finding out. Not knowing what to do, we called the police and explained the situation. They told us that there was essentially nothing they could do, but we insisted that they at least scan the photos for prints. They eventually got back to us saying the photos turned up nothing. Sophia was terrified that whoever sent them would try and blackmail her, and I feared the same. The experience was downright traumatizing. Luckily, nothing ever happened after that, probably because we had gotten the police involved. Sophia was never quite the same around me after what happened, and I can't blame her. I can only hope those pictures don't turn up later in my life. My best friend Ricardo and I were 19. At the risk of sounding pretentious, the two of us come from well-off North Jersey families and get to enjoy our summers down the Jersey Shore. My house is in Belmar, New Jersey, and his is in La Valette. It was a random summer night during the week, and Ricardo was driving the two of us from my house in Belmar down to La Valette, about an hour drive. To be completely honest, I preferred hanging out in Ricardo's house, not only because it was a little nicer, but because the general vibe of La Valette is more geared towards kids our age. If we weren't scouring the area for a party, we could enjoy some drinks on one of the many private beaches we technically weren't supposed to be on. I could go on and on about things to do down the shore, but for the sake of brevity, I'll try my best to get to the point. As we were driving down, we agreed that we'd opt for a quieter night. No partying, links, or anything that we might normally do. The two of us agreed to snag a few beers, roll a joint, and chill on one of the private beaches under the stars. Honestly, it sounded great. The two of us had been going pretty hard with some of our other friends. A break from partying was much needed. To anyone unfamiliar with the layout of La Valette, there's a beach side and a bay side. Most of the beaches feature a really high dune and a steep drop-off as you approach the ocean. If you were to stand at the ocean edge and look back, you'd see a pretty sizable hill of sand. After drinking a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we snagged some bikes from his garage and made our way toward the beach of our choice. For whatever reason, Ricardo insisted on journeying further than I'd ever been, which I didn't quite understand since all the beaches were basically the same. I really didn't mind a longer bike ride though, so I just went with it. Eventually, Ricardo decided on a desolate-looking beach at the end of the road with no cars parked on it. Every house on the street had its lights off. I actually preferred this. This was back when weed was illegal in New Jersey, and we weren't too keen on getting caught. Plus, we did have some drinks with us despite the fact that we were only 19. We hid our bikes under some shrubs. Then we made our way toward the beach. The two of us lit our J and smoked under the stars, the only sound being the light waves of the ocean and the accompanying wind. The beach stretched on endlessly in both directions, and the sand felt cool underneath our feet. The two of us got progressively drunker while we filled the air with laughter and conversation. Eventually, we just laid back in the sand, watching a sky full of stars in hopes of witnessing a shooting star. That's when we heard it. I heard it first. It was almost undetectable. The sound was like a metallic buzzing, sort of like the sound you'd hear in a massive gymnasium with large overhead lights. I really can't describe the sound any better. It was a faint, metallic buzz that couldn't possibly be anything caused by the beach. I sat up and stared at Ricardo, and I could tell the moment he started to hear it too. The two of us whipped our heads in every direction, looking into the darkness for the source of the drone. Strangely, it was difficult to pin down exactly where the sound was coming from. It was just too faint to tell. We were beginning to get freaked out, but were too terrified to move. We assumed that whatever was making that noise would go away, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. There was literally no way we could be seen from our spot on that beach. It was way too dark, and the sound of the ocean definitely drowned out any sounds we had been making. I know it doesn't exactly sound scary, but I'd be lying if I said my heart wasn't pounding out of my chest. The drone continued on, and after another few minutes, Ricardo gestured for me to follow him. I nodded my head in agreement. Leaving was definitely the best option. Just like a scene from a movie, the exact second the two of us stood up, the droning went from a 1 to a 5. It took every ounce of self-control I had to resist the urge to yell in fear. It wasn't a gradual shift. The sound literally increased in a split second, and it was definitely coming from our right. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and a wave of fear washed over me, tensing my body from head to toe. We stared into the darkness and still didn't see anything. But now the drone sounded so close to us that we instinctively started running toward the sand dune. I didn't even know what we were running from. All I knew was that something was seriously wrong and there was someone or something after us. As we were about halfway to the dune, I felt Ricardo place a firm hand on my shoulder, abruptly stopping me from continuing to run. At first, I was confused, but then I saw what his gaze was fixated on. I glanced up toward the dune and saw it. there was a dark figure standing motionlessly at the peak of the dune. Its arms were freakishly long, almost reaching its knees. It was ridiculously tall, and I was shocked at how it managed to stand so still. It was truly terrifying. Ricardo shouted at me, breaking my gaze from the figure, and we continued running, this time parallel to the beach. We ran to the next dune entrance and sprinted up the slope. As we made our way to the peak, we looked back at where we had just came from. I can still remember the terrifying sight that followed. Not only was the dark figure still on the dune, but there were maybe 3 or 4 more standing motionless on the slope. Each one looked like they were facing us. We didn't have time to go back for our bikes, instead opting to run the entire way home. The next morning, we retraced our steps, but couldn't for the lives of us find those bikes. Maybe they had been stolen, or maybe whoever or whatever was stalking us the night before had something to do with it. Either way, I've never experienced anything scarier on a beach and still have trouble explaining most of these events. The weirdest thing for me is I was never able to determine what the buzzing drone was, and to this day, have not heard anything even remotely close to it. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joint. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like. but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night.
Number 5. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave out a low, raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone laying on my nightstand, right where I left it. Number 4. When I was a kid, I was always the last kid to get picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day I was waiting for the bus by myself, and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now. Just get on." He got more and more pushy but didn't do anything crazy. I just kept saying no and he shrugged and left. The real bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school and my parents didn't know until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls. Number 3. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened the door and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets, dog shit, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night I had my girlfriend staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed, looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there. "You should lock your doors at night," she says, and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongue. She has a plastic bag in her hand with her rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell death from that bag. At this point, I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask them what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch, staring at him, holding a power drill. Come to think about it, now I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically shitting myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently she's a violent schizophrenic and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution, and in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. Number 2. I was about 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office, so I get up and go check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is made especially weird because I'm working in the industrial district at 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open. I go back to my desk, put a quick call through to security to let them know, and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more and end up running to my car, getting in and taking off. I'm almost home and I've started to calm down a bit when I realize that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked the whole time. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murderers that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward about 30 minutes. I've called a friend of mine who says he's out drinking, so I decide I'm going to join him. I jump on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's a nice night and I'm in no big rush, just enjoying the moonlight when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly, and when he's right beside me, he shoots me a smile, and I can describe it as purely insane. I kind of flinch and am taken aback as he rides on. That's when I realize he's riding my mom's bike. Needless to say, I sprint the hell home. When I get there, sure enough, her bike is missing and one of my car's doors is open. The back left one. I was driving and had no need to open that door. Number 1. I worked at a campground on night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my PS2 and game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot shack, with nothing around but dark all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy who was quitting told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it rang every night at 4:17 a.m., just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He's never answered it himself. I go for a few months with the job. It was the middle of the summer, so most nights I had the windows closed, so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning, the phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water and then put where it sat. One night I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and would go wait at the phone until it rang. When it did, I answered it, but there was no sound, just dead air like someone was on the other line but wasn't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same results. I didn't think anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October, I decided to answer the phone once again. I set my alarm, and when the time came, I answered the phone. I repeatedly said hello into the phone. Then I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that sounded was rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. He said my name, my complete name, first, middle, and last. It was a voice I've never heard. My voice caught in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change into the payphone and hit star 69. The number had come from California. I lived in Indiana.
A couple weeks ago, my dad came home and pitched me a small job offer. One of his coworkers was going away for a few days and needed somebody he could trust to watch over his house. The reason my dad pitched this to me was because the man's house has a big CCTV system, basically a camera in every room, and then an operating desk where all screens could be watched on a big monitor. And I'm a computer science major, so my dad just always assumes that I know how to work anything technological. The man told my dad that he'd pay me $200 for the 2 days just to watch the house. Whatever that meant. My dad drove me to the house and introduced me to the man, whose name doesn't matter. The man made it seem like he preferred I stay in the upstairs room with the monitors as opposed to roaming the house all day. That was fine with me though. So when I wasn't eating, I was mostly just sitting in that room with the TV on in the background, and doing schoolwork on my laptop. Ironically, the thing I was doing the least was keeping an eye on the monitors. Night came. I started wondering where in the house I should sleep, since surprisingly, we hadn't discussed that. So I sat back down at the desk and looked at all the different rooms on the screens to see which rooms had beds or couches. I noticed something I wasn't expecting to notice though. The back screen door was open downstairs. I didn't remember it being open. I looked through each and every camera screen in a panic. In the living room, a closet door was open. This one I knew wasn't open earlier. I texted my dad to call the man and ask him if he came back home. Meanwhile, I continued watching the screen. On the grainy, dark image, a tall person who resembled only a black shadow on the screen stepped out from the closet. I pulled my arms off the desk as I covered my mouth with my hands in shock. As I did this, however, my left elbow pulled some heavy object from the desk onto the floor, creating a big thud. The person in the image very clearly moved their head up to the ceiling as a response to the noise. They went for the stairs, walking up very, very slowly, step by step. Meanwhile, I got a text back from my dad saying, "No, he's not. I just spoke to him half an hour ago. Why?" I got so caught up in my phone texting my dad to send help that I didn't even pay attention to the monitor. There was a knock at the door. I looked at it and then the screens. The first screen I laid my eyes on was the one showing the person outside the door to the room I was in. When I remembered that door had no lock, the only thing I could think to do was jump out the window into the bushes below. I ran halfway down the block and then stopped when my dad called me. I had him call his friend and ask him if he was expecting somebody in the house. The man said he had no relatives or friends who had his key or would ever let themselves into his home. So he called the cops and had them review the footage. I got to watch all of it, and it showed everything. From the moment the intruder broke the glass to the backyard door, to the moment I jumped out the window and him running away shortly after. The intruder was never found. The footage was just too dark to identify his face. One day I agreed to house sit for a friend just for the night. He and his family were going on a short vacation and needed somebody to watch their pets and house. I agreed to do it for a small amount of money. I'd been to his house many times before, so I was familiar with the layout. Nothing eventful happened at all the entire day. I just fed the 2 cats, the fish, and the birds. I went to sleep on the couch in the sunroom because it was my favorite room in their house. It was a tiny room surrounded by windows with a big TV mounted on the wall. I fell asleep with the TV on, but I woke up not long after. I turned it off, and now the room was dark. I tried to go back to sleep, but I thought I heard the sound of the PVC gate closing outside. I thought it might have just been the wind. The room had windows surrounding it in 3 directions, so I was basically looking around in a circle out into the darkness. I sat back down on the couch when I calmed down, but I heard a leaf crunching outside. That's when I knew someone was out there. I took another look outside. There was literally somebody pressed up against the glass to the window behind the couch. They were looking in, but I didn't know if they could see me or not. I yelled as loud as I could at them to fuck off. I'm not a big dude, but whoever this guy was appeared to be, so I wasn't going out there. Shockingly, this didn't scare the person away. In fact, they walked over to the back door and tried the doorknob. I ran to get the phone, and then I yelled into the sunroom, "I'm calling the police." Thankfully, this worked. He ran off. I didn't actually call the cops though. Instead, I texted my friend just to let him know of an almost break-in. I slept through the night in an upstairs bedroom, locked. The next morning, my friend's family returned to find all of the tires on their sedan that was left behind had been slashed. We speculated that somebody who had it out for their family and knew of the vacation they were taking had some kind of plan to break in. But when that failed, they settled for this. That's just speculation, but still, it's the least terrifying explanation to me. When I was in college, I used to work as a babysitter on the side to make a little extra cash. One day I saw an ad posted in the library that was requesting a house sitter for the weekend and to inquire through phone. I was used to babysitting, but house sitting sounded even better, same thing minus taking care of kids. So I called the number as soon as I got home and spoke with a guy named Chuck. I met him that Friday and he showed me around the house. He and his wife eventually went on their way and I was left alone in the house. I was given one of the spare upstairs bedrooms. I say one of because there were a few, the house was huge. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on at all for the whole day. It was quite uneventful, and I felt like I was missing out on going out since it was a Friday night. But I kept reminding myself that I'd be making $200 for the whole weekend. Later in the night, I kind of just laid in the guest bed that I'd be sleeping in and watched a movie on demand. I wondered why this couple felt the need to hire somebody to watch their house for the whole weekend. There weren't any pets or anything after all. Though it was a very, very nice house, so it seemed the most obvious that they just wanted a sense of security for their house while they were gone. By the time I turned off the TV, I was shot and probably minutes away from falling asleep. But the slight sound of a click, along with a sudden glow in the room, woke me completely. I opened my eyes fully to see light creeping out from under the crack of a door. It took me a second to realize that it was a closet door. I flipped on my side as my heart started beating 200 beats a minute. I pulled the sheets up to my chin and pretended to be asleep. I was certain someone was in that closet, and I was simply too afraid to get out of that bed and make any noises. Words can't describe my fear in that bed, or how with each passing minute I felt more and more like I could possibly die. The closet door opened, I could hear it, but I could not see it as I was facing the opposite way. I closed my eyes and tried my best not to move. The room went dark again as I heard another click, a bit louder this time. The closet door quietly closed in the background, but I didn't hear anything else. I was afraid that whoever it was went back into the closet. I didn't know what to do because they had to have seen me and I didn't want to run for it in fear of being chased. The room was dead silent as I was thinking over my next course of action. Eventually, I decided to just peek over to the other side and make sure the coast was clear. I flipped on my other side. Someone was standing right next to the bed with their hand reaching towards me. My reaction, I pulled my arms up towards me, balled up and backed up onto the wall in shock. The person stood there showing no signs of leaving. I hopped over the metal bar at the end of the bed, ran for the door, down the stairs, and then out the front door. I ran all the way home, let myself in, called Chuck and explained. I told him it was his problem now and hung up. He tried calling back, but I didn't answer. Maybe there was some story to be told, like they knew this person, or they frequently dealt with break-ins and that's why they needed me. I didn't care though. I didn't even care about the money. I just didn't want to speak to that Chuck guy ever again, or see that house ever again. Halloween 2016. My three friends and I, who for the purpose of this story will be named J, K, and L respectively, were trick-or-treating downtown. Downtown was always a mob scene on Halloween only because the houses were so close together, meaning more candy for the amount walked. 10 o'clock was always the time things really started to die down, and by 10:30 we were really the only kids still out trick-or-treating. Only like 1 in 10 houses actually opened their doors this late, so we called it quits with the trick-or-treating and decided to just screw around. It was a Saturday night after all. As we called it quits with the trick-or-treating, a lone person in a clown costume was walking really, really slowly from the black fog in the distance. This was a legit clown costume too. The makeup was crazy. From the slit-mouth smile to the blood-filled boils, it was a scary costume. The four of us laughed and screamed in reaction, but ultimately walked away. We went to a park that was nearby to just goof around, make a mess with silly string and shaving cream and whatever. We weren't the first, however. Strands of silly string littered the playground, as well as shaving cream smudged on the walls of a bathroom building in the park to spell out obscenities. We all hung out on the playground, but Jay pointed out to the dark horizon where 2 clowns were walking over to us. One of them the same clown from earlier. I didn't think it was possible, but the second clown was even more disturbing than the first. The first clown now seemed to be wielding some kind of long, spear-like object. They both approached us really, really slowly. The funniness of the situation quickly wore off as they got closer and closer. Then they started to charge us. We all ran in different directions. One of the 2 clowns was chasing me. Out the park and down the street I ran. I didn't know the area too well, but I did know how to get back to Elle's house. I ran all the way there. About halfway there I lost the clown. I called Elle and told him I was in his backyard. He was out of breath, but he said he just lost one of the clowns and was on his way over now. I said I'd call Jay, and he said he'd call Kay. Luckily, Jay picked up on the first ring. He wasn't being chased, so he didn't sound as freaked out as Elle did. I told him to meet us at Elle's house. 10 minutes later, all 4 of us were in Elle's backyard, gathering our thoughts and discussing what just went down. We had a good laugh about it now that it was over as we ate some of the candies that we got. Kay went home, while me, Jay, and Elle hung out in the living room for a while. Lights off, TV on, playing some Xbox One party game. Jay looked out the window and then ducked, and told us to shh and turn off the TV. When we asked why, he said there was a clown out there. I didn't believe him, so I looked out the window. He screamed, "Don't," but it was too late. The clown standing outside of Elle's house looked right at me through the window. I shut the curtains and told Elle he wasn't lying. His parents weren't home, so going to his dad wasn't an option. Instead, we shut off the TV and went upstairs to Elle's bedroom. We looked out the window. The clown wasn't there anymore. Actually, we never saw either of the clowns again. But the next morning, Elle texted the three of us, saying he found a rubber clown nose on his backyard patio table. He said it was obviously placed there with intent to scare us, and mission accomplished because it worked. Luckily, that clown epidemic didn't last more than a month later. After that, it just became an old story. It was a school night Halloween. My mom and dad took my two twin brothers out trick-or-treating. I didn't have plans, so my parents kind of forced me to answer the door and hand out candies while they were gone. Since we live in a cul-de-sac on a dead-end street, we get next to no trick-or-treaters on Halloween, so every time the doorbell rang, I kind of jumped. I was in the living room watching TV, with the bucket of candies next to me on a small table. Butterfingers, the one and only candy my mom always got on Halloween for some reason. The doorbell rang, so I took the orange bucket and brought it to the door and opened it. There was someone in a scream mask and robe holding out a pillow sack. It didn't look like he got a lot of candy for the night, and given that the night was almost over and nobody was really coming to the house, and he was alone, which is always kind of sad, I gave him a bunch of candy. He walked away without saying thanks, which kind of made me feel bad, but it was honestly whatever. I stopped thinking about it as soon as I sat back down on the couch. The movie I was watching ended, so I started surfing the channels. During one of the brief moments of silence as the TV flipped from one channel to the other, I heard a thud and a bump come from downstairs near the back door. To better hear what it could have been, I turned the volume on the TV all the way down and went to the stairway. The back door was wide open. My heart started racing as I started to feel sick inside. I had forgotten to lock it when I went back there. The big question was if what I heard was the sound of the door opening or closing, and if someone was in the house. Naturally, I called down the stairway for my mom and dad, and then my twins' names. The silence from down in the dark den was creepy as hell. I was afraid to go down there. Unfortunately, there's no door to separate the main floor from the den stairway, so sitting in the living room suddenly didn't seem very comfortable. I kept the TV on, but muted. I just felt safer with the extra light it provided. It took a while for some reason, but it finally hit me to call my parents and ask them to come home. My mom said they'd be home within half an hour. I told my mom I was scared that someone was downstairs because I heard something. She assured me that there was nothing and it was just my imagination. I hung up the phone and immediately heard the sound of wood foundation cracking under one of the carpeted steps to the den. I froze on the couch. Literally, I couldn't move a muscle, not even a finger. Then there was another crack. As silently as I could, I sat up from the couch into a half-crouched position, tiptoeing to the front door. But as I passed the couch that blocked the view of the den stairway from the living room, I saw something on the stairway. It was a scream mask, leering up from the stairs at me, but in a way where he was obviously not trying to get caught. The angle at which I saw the mask and the dark lighting made the sight so much more disturbing. When he saw me though, he went the other way, back into the darkness of the den. I locked myself in my room upstairs and called my mom again to tell her what happened. They cut their trip short and came home. Only when my parents got home did I feel safe to leave my room. My dad and I checked the whole den, every closet, every room. Luckily, there was no one. The moral of the story simply comes down to keeping your doors locked, because apparently this guy just helped himself through our back door. My older brother was having a Halloween party. He was a sophomore in college. I was actually only in the 8th grade. Our parents weren't home all weekend, so he was taking advantage of the opportunity, I guess. He made it abundantly clear he didn't want me in the house during the party, but fortunately I already made plans to go trick-or-treating with 2 of my friends. We all agreed it would probably be our last year trick-or-treating, so we wanted to make it a good time. We started midday right after school, the prime time where most kids were out, most everyone answers their doors, and still had abundant supplies of candies. We each filled 2 bags of candy by dark, making stops at our houses in between to bring them home, of course. But we weren't done. We weren't satisfied yet. We needed another bag, of course. After eating dinner and resting at my friend's place for a while, we went back out with empty bags and flashlights. You'll find out why in a little bit. It was probably around 9 o'clock now. Getting candy was a bit slower by now since most buckets were empty and not everyone was answering their doors. An hour flew by because we were still having fun, though we didn't get much candy this time. By the time it was like 10:30 or 11, we stopped because it just seemed obnoxious to knock on people's doors this late. Everyone already went home because it was a Tuesday night, a work night and school night. But we already agreed we'd be skipping school the next day. We were all in the same homeroom and already knew nothing was going on at school tomorrow. So to us, the night was still young. So we went for a run to what locals called the Ghoul House. It was a house with some history. A couple got divorced after their child somehow died in the house, and then the wife moved out. A couple weeks later, the husband shot himself at the kitchen table. It's been fenced off ever since. Why the house hasn't been sold or torn down by now is beyond me. When we got there, we realized how scary the house was in the dark. It stood taller than the other houses, and it had a black fence surrounding the front yard, with overgrown bushes hugging it. The front gate was pretty easy to hop. The deviance of what we were doing just made it so much more thrilling. We walked around back just to be safe, hoping no neighbors would see us. The back windows were boarded up from the inside, and the back door had a table wedged up against it. Someone clearly tried really hard to keep people out, possibly a neighbor. Through teamwork, we were able to lift the table quietly from off the door and onto the grass. The door was missing a doorknob, and it pushed in relatively easily. We were inside, and it felt weird, felt uncomfortable, and at the same time exhilarating. All of us had our flashlights, creating a decent amount of light in the otherwise pitch-black building. We were in the back living area of the house, some kind of den. The wood floors were all creaky as hell, and everything seemed to have been untouched for years. It didn't seem like anyone ever really broke in there before. That room was clear of anything interesting, so we moved on to the kitchen. An archaic fridge sat in the corner. One of my friends opened it up, and immediately the room filled with a stale, rotten, plasticky type odor. The fridge had some old empty milk and orange juice cartons. That was about it. The whole kitchen smelled foul, so we got out of there quickly. Next was the living room, and this room was just creepy. Something about it, I don't know, it just made you think that any time you turned around, there'd be someone standing in one of the corners. One of my friends pointed his light up and said, "Look at that." There was a giant hole in the ceiling, which led right up to a room upstairs. As my other friend and I also shined our lights up there was a couple thumps from right above us. We all shut our lights. I got that horrible, painful feeling in my heart area from what I just heard. We all whispered very, very lightly that those were definitely footsteps. One friend whispered we should go up there, see what it was. My other friend and I said absolutely no way and started tiptoeing to the back door. But he was persistent. He didn't follow us. Instead, he went upstairs. He didn't even make a good effort at being quiet about it. We kind of felt like we had to wait for him down in the living room now, so we stayed put. We heard his footsteps upstairs now, crossing the upstairs of the house, until he stopped right above us. My eyes were adjusted to the dark by this point, so even without our flashlights on, I was able to see the figure of my friend, standing above us, looking down through that hole in the ceiling. I tried whispering up there loud enough so that he could hear, but apparently he couldn't. I didn't want to get any louder, but suddenly we heard footsteps coming from the stairway in the living room. We both turned on our flashlights and shined them up to the top of the staircase to see our other friend walking down the stairs. The realization set in immediately, and neither of us had the balls to shine our lights up to that hole in the ceiling to see who was actually standing there. I just screamed run, and we all booked it to the back door, out the house, and to one of my friend's house. The friend who went upstairs said he smelled something foul up there, like a rotting carcass, and that he also heard breathing coming from one of the rooms. To this day, we have no idea who was in that house, but it seemed unlikely that it was just another curious wanderer, given how boarded up the house was. To say the least, we don't go there anymore.
Number 3. My dad has been an MTA Transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 3 in the morning. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall and skinny man, wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the furthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" And they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed to his office door. Sure enough, there was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office. Before leaving to catch the next train, he checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, he saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform, and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt, before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder, and yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalks. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of the paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside, only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless and or dangerous, and who knows what he actually wanted with my dad. Number 2. Me and my 3 friends were in New York around Christmas time. We didn't finally decide to leave until about maybe 2 in the morning. We got on the first train that we could catch, and as expected, it was empty. We were pretty sobered up by then. Then there was a sudden commotion in the next car over. We had peeked through the glass in between the cars, and there were 2 hooded men, or maybe teenagers, standing obnoxiously close to a woman sitting in one of the seats who was screaming for help. I suggested that we go over and kick their asses, but as me and a buddy got a closer look, we saw they were armed with handguns. I pushed all my friends to get to the next car over, away from the armed men. I took a look back and saw one of the men pointing at us before starting to follow. We ran through at least 3 different cars with the men following us before the train finally stopped at the next station. We all booked it through the old station to the nearest place we could hide. I got separated from my friends, so I went to hide behind a garbage can. I could hear my chaser's shoes hitting the tiled floors, so I knew I had no time to find a better hiding spot. I peeked through the opening at the top of the bin. I could get a better look at them now. One was black, the other was Indian, and they were both really young looking. I was sure they were only trying to rob us, until I heard one of them say, "If you find them, kill them." I hope you understand why I almost gave away my position in reaction to hearing this. With a gasp and almost pulling the garbage bin down with me as I returned to cover, I consider it a miracle neither of them caught me. They left the area. I took notice that they didn't have their guns drawn at that moment. I ran in the opposite direction of the 2 and quickly caught my friends who were waving me over from behind a large pole. I took cover with them behind another pole not far from that one, and we waited for as long as we thought necessary. The big shock to this story, though, was when we caught glimpse of the woman from the train, who we thought was being threatened by the 2 men, walking over in the direction of the men and then calling something along the lines of, "Where are they? Don't tell me you didn't get them." The 2 men reappeared from beyond a corner, walking over to the woman. The rest of what they said was too low to pick up on. They walked back down the stairs to the platforms, and as we could guess, waited for another train to run their trap again. At the very least, we called the police and reported what was going on, but I have no idea if they were ever caught. Number 1. My name is Danny, I'm 22 years old, and this was the most horrifying experience of my life. I live and work in New York City, but I don't have a car, so my main mode of transportation is the subway. It was a Saturday night. I was on my way home from a party in the middle of the night. I did this about every other weekend, so I was completely fine with taking the subway alone at night. Walking down the steps, entering the underground without a soul in sight, it was always a bit chilling. This specific station was very tightly spaced. As I was walking, I could almost feel as if I were being watched or followed. along with the occasional echoing bang type sound emitting from an unknown location. I was early for the train, so I sat on a bench and waited. This is something straight out of a horror movie. I heard this exact phrase. "Psst, over here, buddy." There was somebody standing on the tracks inside the tunnel, poking his head out and looking at me. It was a filthy looking man, I'd say in his early 40s. He gave me a smile, a horrible yellow smile with at least 3 teeth missing, and I could tell that even from where I was sitting. I did the best I could to pay no attention to him, but he wouldn't go away. There was laughing coming from inside the tunnel, and then another disgusting looking man stuck his face out as well. This man gave me a nasty smile as well, before telling me to come hang out with them in the tunnel. The way they stared at me though, their eyes wouldn't even move. It's as if their sight was locked onto me. I resumed doing the best I could to ignore them and just wait for the train. I noticed in my peripheral vision that one of the men moved away into the tunnel, returning moments later with another face. I had to look again. There was a third face, but this one was hunched over and lifeless. It looked like one of the men were holding the guy's face up. The sound of the train approaching felt like 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. I got up ready to board the train, but when I got closer to the edge of the platform, I nearly threw up at the sight. The 2 men were going back into the tunnel, but the second man in the back was holding something in his hand. A head. Just a head. Like a decapitated head. They disappeared from sight onto the side of the tunnel. As the train stopped, I got into the first car, planning on warning the conductor, but no later than after we left the station. I didn't want to be there a second longer. As the train began to move, I saw legs moving down the stairs to the platform, but that was it. I didn't get to see who it was. But what I did get to see, as the train moved into the tunnels, I caught a glimpse of a group of men, hunched up against the railing, inches away from the train window, and they were all looking right at me. I knocked on the conductor's door like a madman, screaming it was an emergency. He opened up and I explained what I just saw. He radioed to somebody in charge of the station, as well as another higher-up of the company, who I'm sure took care of it, or contacted the proper authorities or security, whatever. It seemed to take ages for my stop to come, but when it did, I practically had to hop in my walk from relief. I have since been to one party at the same friend's house, but I skipped that station. I decided it was worth it to take the extra long walk to the next station. I don't know if weird shit happens often in the subway at night. In my experience prior to this incident, it never did. But after this experience, I think I should say you should be extremely cautious when in an isolated place like a subway station late at night.
With everyone playing Pokemon Go, the game that actually forces you to get outside and walk around to find Pokemon in pretty much the world's biggest scavenger hunt, the app is creating a lot of laughs, whether they be from pictures of Pokemon in some pretty funny locations or videos of angry player reactions. However, with so many people suddenly exploring places they never would have otherwise, some are finding things they weren't supposed to find, or perhaps getting into situations they don't want to be in. Number 1. A story just about everybody's heard about by now is 19-year-old Shayla Wiggins from Wyoming finding a dead body. Shayla was told to find a Pokemon in a natural water source, but instead found a man's corpse. She was walking towards a bridge along the shore when she saw something in the water, and after taking a second look, she realized it was a body. Shayla is currently living in a trailer park for the summer with her mother, and in said trailer park, Shayla hopped a fence to get to the Pokemon shown on her map. The body was found in the Big Wind River, however there didn't appear to be any foul play involved and was ruled accidental, likely a drowning.
The sheriff's department is still currently looking into it, but as of right now, the actual story behind the death remains unknown. Shayla, of course, did not catch the Pokemon. Number 2. Another player of the game shared his experience on Reddit. The 32-year-old man explained how he found himself hunting for Pokemon for the first time at 4 in the morning walking home from work after working the night shift, and later encountered about 5 sketchy-looking men, from his own words, on his late-night stroll. The man told Reddit of the little park that he must pass on his way home every night. The park had 2 Pokestops and a gym, so he decided to walk through the park this one time just to see exactly what the stops were for and what they did. Somewhere through the park, however, the man ran into a group of 5 younger guys, 3 black, 2 white. They all looked as though they were in the middle of a drug deal. One of the guys called him over, to which he just ignored them. They started to follow him, and before he could even decide to run away or not, the sound of 2 police cars quickly pulling up on the road alongside the park froze everyone in their spots. The group was reported by an anonymous resident for a potential drug deal, which actually turned out to be the case. The man, though questioned, was let go shortly after. Number 3. To the Pokemon Company's dismay, many players, or trainers as they refer to them, have been victims of robbery. In fact, different YouTubers have actually posted video footage of themselves getting robbed while playing the game. For example, YouTuber Aiden's Life.
And that's when I found this.
Yo.
Do me a favor.
Yo, what's up?
Can you put your shit in this bag real quick for me?
What?
No, like straight up, we're gonna have a problem.
Whoa, what the fuck?
Put it in the bag.
Are you serious?
Straight up.
Get it out? Yeah.
Seeing something like this happen to someone so unsuspecting is scary, and something like this has apparently been happening every day. One of the bigger cases so far was the story of a group of armed robbers apparently targeting victims using the game, who had done so successfully up to 8 times. The group of 4 teenagers were apprehended by police in O'Fallon, Missouri on Sunday after allegedly robbing a 33-year-old man. Most of you know the app contains Pokestops, which are randomly placed on notable locations in towns where players can earn points, Pokeballs, and make purchases. The player has to actually walk to that location to earn the points, which are available to all players. The game also features a lure module, which attracts Pokemon to a specific Pokestop. This invites other players to come to the location and collect Pokemon as well. This is exactly how these 4 teenagers lured unsuspecting players, mostly kids, to this specific location where they robbed them. One of the victims shared his experience, explaining he was simply walking to a Pokestop in the night when 3 guys came out from behind a parked van with a handgun demanding money. 2 of the robbers were 18 years old, one 17, and another 16. The 16-year-old is the only robber not being charged as an adult. Number 4. More than 1 dead body has already been found by Pokemon Go players, not even 2 weeks after release. 3 women playing the game found a dead body on Thursday the 14th near a creek bed in a San Diego park. The 3 women were walking on a trail while hunting for Pokemon at about 3 p.m. in Marion Bear Memorial Park when they stumbled into the body of a man who had been dead for quite some time. One of the women had apparently picked up on a very pungent and foul odor, and that's when they noticed the body laying in a patch of bushes near the bed.
I froze, stopped in my tracks, turned away from the body, and I had looked at my friend Amanda in the face. I looked my sister in the face, and I said, I think I just found a dead body. I looked down and I saw the legs, the bones of a dead body with no feet, no ankles, no shoes, nothing. It had looked like he'd been chewed.
Police believe foul play is a possibility, but his death will be further investigated. But that's not even it with the dead bodies. You won't believe it, but yet another Pokemon Go player has stumbled into a dead body. This man's body was recovered the same past Thursday afternoon from a small stream behind the New Hampshire Holocaust Memorial in Nashua after it was spotted by someone playing the game. The game led the player to a rather obscure spot where he found the body. As of right now, the police don't believe that foul play was involved. The police are, however, becoming more and more grateful for the discoveries that the app is leading to. In fact, some police forces are already using the app to lure fugitives to certain locations. Now, I can't necessarily verify if this last one is 100% true or not, but this one comes from a Redditor named SD Skalisk, who made a post which has since been deleted, sharing something really scary that happened to him while playing Pokemon Go. The Redditor stated that he's 13 years old and that a really creepy couple moved in across the street from him. A couple who could always be heard arguing within a certain radius from their house. The man would always sit on his stoop and watch the kid playing Pokemon Go around the block. One late night, close to midnight, he was playing the game doing his usual laps around the block, when he noticed one of the Pokestops on the block, which happened to be a church, had a lure enabled on it. When he stepped in front of the church, he could see the man from across the street hiding behind one of the church pillars. He simply kept walking, pretending like he didn't notice, and got home safely. This was posted only a couple days ago and has had no updates since. This whole story can very easily be true, as the app can in a sense be a predator's dream come true. A lot of players are on the younger side, and certain adults may familiarize themselves with the app in order to lure children into quieter areas. So if you play the game, take the loading screen a little seriously, because believe it or not, there has not been a single day since the game's release without news websites reporting armed robberies or even dead body discoveries linked to the game. But hey, you gotta catch them all, right? This happened way back in 2005. I was 18. I was living in Uvalde, Texas, a very low-income neighborhood, the kind you'll find sprawled out all over the place in rural Texas when you're not right outside of a city. The closest city to me was San Antonio. I was going to some local community college, because that's all my parents could afford for me. One of my best friends from high school, Andrew, moved to San Antonio to go to San Antonio College. He was living in some small apartment a little outside of the city with a roommate. His girlfriend would also often stay with him. Since the city's only really an hour and a half away, I would visit him all the time. He invited me this one weekend to come crash for the night, so I took my trusty old 1995 Toyota pickup truck. Nah, just kidding, the thing was a piece of crap. The gas gauge didn't even work on it. I'd have to always just keep track of when the last time I filled the tank up was, then reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, which was a straight shot from Uvalde to San Antonio. I was on the road at like 3 p.m. on a Friday, and there was no traffic at all. I got to Andrew at a reasonable time. His girlfriend wouldn't be getting there until tomorrow, so tonight we were gonna go out. We stopped at a liquor store and we drank in his apartment for a while with his roommate. Then the three of us went to this dive bar that would kind of look the other way with fake IDs. That was basically our night. We got back to their apartment around 2 a.m. after getting food. I slept on the couch. The next day would have almost been the same thing, but Andrew and his girlfriend were having issues all day, and as the two of them got drunker as the night progressed, she started yelling at him in front of me, and it got really awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't really have much to drink that day because I was already iffy about staying the night with her there. I eventually decided I would just head back home. I said goodbye to everyone and started my journey home. It was very late at night. I want to guess midnight, maybe a little earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I would fly for my pickup standards. But suddenly the engine started sputtering. I felt my heart completely drop as I realized I forgot to fill up the tank. I slowed down, but it was too late. The engine cut. I pulled to the side of the road and tried starting it a few times, but it did no good. I took out my cell phone, which was equally as shitty as my truck, and I tried to get a signal. No shot. I couldn't even call for help. I had to just put my hazards on and hope a good Samaritan would pass. You wouldn't believe how long I sat on the side of the road before seeing headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it zoomed past me, ignoring me. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. I was starting to feel hopeless, like maybe I should just sleep in my car and wait till sunrise to get help. So that's what I was gonna do. I got inside my car, took the key out of the ignition to cut the battery, and just angled my seat back to go to sleep.
I would hear the occasional car zooming past like once every 10 minutes, but it didn't feel worth waving people down in the dark. It seemed sketchy for myself and to the people in the cars, but when I was starting to actually drift away to sleep, a car door closing from behind me woke me up. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car pulled up behind me with its headlights off. I turned around now to get a better look. There was some big pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside of it, nor did I see anyone outside of it. Maybe someone pulled over to help. I got out of the car and said "excuse me" to no response. I walked closer to the truck just to confirm no one was inside. Then I walked back to my car. This was weird. I looked towards the trees on the side of the road. Maybe someone was pissing in the woods. I went back inside of my car and locked the door. This was just too weird. Suddenly there was a tap at my window. I jumped. I looked to see a man looking down at me into the car, smiling. I didn't do anything yet. He said, "Hey buddy, need a hand?" I lowered the window a crack and said, "Hey, I ran out of gas." The man said, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." When he said this, I thought he meant help him with a gas jug to fill up my tank or something, honestly. And so I stepped out of the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his truck. But he stood there, looked down at me because he was much taller, still smiling, and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took me a second to process what he meant. I was literally a broke college student driving a piece of shit pickup truck. I wasn't about to get robbed of the only cash I had and my phone. I ran for it in the direction of the trees. I'm small but fast. I turned around and saw he was chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged all over the place until I seemed to lose him. Then I crouched behind a big tree to catch my breath. When I heard him approaching closer, I quieted my breath. I heard him say out loud, "I'll kill you, you piece of shit." I don't know if he was just saying it out loud out of anger, or if he wanted me to hear it, but I was too scared to move. Even after I heard his footsteps move away, I didn't move. In fact, I stayed in this position the rest of the night, eventually laying behind this big tree up until dawn. I went back over to the highway to my truck, and the truck behind me was gone, but my truck's doors were both open. I found that my glove box had been gone through and completely emptied of anything somewhat valuable. My flannel hoodie was also taken, which had something in the pocket, I'm sure. I finally managed to wave down a good Samaritan, and he gave me a ride to the closest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and the man brought me back to my car, where I filled my tank just enough to drive the truck to a gas station to fill up completely. Then I went straight home. This was a real-life learning experience for me that there are bad people out there who will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable spot, but there are also good people, like the man who helped me. When I was 18, I was very immature and naive. I was kind of a jerk when I was on the road, honking whenever I got impatient, borderline cutting people off. Looking back now, it was very stupid, and if I ever have kids, I'll be that much more strict with them as far as their driving. That being said, I did drive a lot for someone my age. I went away to school, 5 hours away from home. No matter what day of the week, traffic always gets atrocious the closer I get to home. So during breaks, I'll drive home at night to avoid this. It goes from a 4 to 5 hour drive down to a 3-hour drive. It was the beginning of winter break, as the fall semester just ended. All my friends left for home on the same day. I just waited till later on in the night to head out, because there's nothing I hate more than traffic. I used to drive a Mazda 3 that I would beat the ever-living crap out of, and admittedly, I used to be known for driving my car to a near-empty tank consistently. People would comment on it whenever they'd be in the car with me, and I'd always assure them that the car would still have at least 30 miles to go even after the needle would hit E. I found out the night I was driving home from school that I was wrong. I was only like an hour into my drive on the interstate. The needle was on E, and I was pushing my luck, waiting for a gas station sign instead of looking up the nearest one on the map. The car started making these weird sounds suddenly and jolting, and that's when I realized I may have actually run the tank empty this time. I got off the first exit ramp and hoped it would lead right to a gas station. This exit was dark though, with no street lights, and there was just woods on either side. I was scared to slow down and lose my speed because I didn't know if I'd have enough gas to find a gas station. I blew through the stop sign at the end of the ramp and made a sharp, fast turn on the intersecting road, which was another dark road surrounded by woods. I was screwed. The car eventually came to a stop and the engine died. Things only got worse when I took out my phone and saw I had no bars. I have T-Mobile, which is the worst possible reception anywhere far from a major city. I tried calling 911 because I was stupid and thought that 911 works even without reception. Of course, it didn't. I was terrified because I didn't know what to do. I turned on my hazard lights and just waited for someone to pass by. It was a long time before I saw headlights approaching. When I did, I flashed my headlights at them, and they passed me, made a U-turn, then pulled up on the grass behind me. I didn't know who was getting out of that car though, and I was an 18-year-old defenseless girl. I just cracked the window down a little bit as this man approached my car. I told him I need help, I ran out of gas. He offered to give me a ride to the nearest gas station. He was this balding guy with glasses on. He kind of looked trustworthy. I had no other apparent options but to accept his offer. I got out of the car and followed him to his car, making sure to lock my doors first. His car was a black Honda, year probably a 2010. It smelled funky in his car. I couldn't pin what the smell could be though. He banged another U-turn and started driving in the direction he was driving before. He made conversation with me, asking where I was from and basic questions. I was honest with him that I was driving home from school. He said he lived in the area, and that they don't get too many out-of-towners getting off the interstate for this quiet little town. The route we were taking lacked any buildings anywhere. It was just woods everywhere. I asked if he knew of any gas stations, and he said yeah, just a ways up the road. I started hearing bumping and thumping coming from the back of the vehicle. It sounded like the trunk. At first I thought it was maybe just bumps in the road or a loose object in the trunk. He seemed to keep talking and talking, like he wouldn't stop. Finally, we got to a sort of town-looking area. There were some lights and buildings at last. A diner and a few small houses. There was a red light at the first intersection since I got in his car. We came to a stop, and for the first time there was silence. And then, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone screaming in the trunk, followed by thumps and bangs. I looked at the man, who looked at me. In a split second, I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and ran, while at the same time he tried grabbing me and pulling me back into the car. I heard him get out as well, but instead of chasing me, he ran to close his passenger side door, and then I heard him floor it down the street. I ran into the diner and asked for help, making a scene. I used their phone to call 911. I waited there, and it became this whole huge thing, with multiple police showing up to the diner to take a report. Given the gravity of the report that I was making, that I heard someone in the trunk of the car, they had to get every last detail from me about the man's car, his appearance, and where he picked me up. I was also given a ride back to my car so that they could also include the pickup location in the report. They also helped me get a hold of AAA, which eventually would come to my location to fill my car with gas. This was overall the scariest experience of my life. I was shaken to the core the whole rest of the ride home. I hope they found that man. I hope whoever was in that trunk is still alive today. For all I know, that man could have been bringing me to his house or somewhere else, and I was just lucky I had a chance to get out at that red light. I live in Burke County, North Carolina in Morganton. I'm used to the quiet lifestyle that comes with living in a rural place. You get some weird characters here and there, but it's usually nothing too bad. I own a nice plot of land with my husband. My work schedule fluctuates. Sometimes I work days, sometimes I work nights. This happened on a night that I was on my way home after a night shift, so it had to be like 3 a.m. My phone was almost dead, I was hungry, I was tired, and I just wanted to get some food and head home. I stopped at a gas station to get $10 worth of gas and also a packaged sandwich, which I proceeded to eat inside the gas station cafe. Some sketchy guy was eyeing me for a little until he left the building without buying anything. After eating, I went outside to fill up the gas, and then got back in the car. The smell of gasoline was extra pungent for some reason. These roads are very dark and twisty at night, so I was driving slow, especially since I was tired after a long day of work. Then something unexpected happened. The needle on the gas gauge suddenly dropped to E, and the low gas light came on and beeped. I had no idea what was going on. I'm not a car person, and I'd never run out of gas before this. Plus, the needle just suddenly dropped. I thought at first that the computer was glitching, so I pulled over and restarted the car, but the needle was still on E. I tried to continue driving, but the engine died. I started having a panic attack. I called my husband first thing, and thank God he picked up. I asked him how did my car run out of gas after I just filled up, and as I got out of the car, I smelled gasoline. I told him this, and he said it sounds like I have a leak. He told me he'd head right over, and he'd call our roadside assistance company, but then I heard a car coming with no headlights, and suddenly it stopped, not far behind my car. I suddenly thought to bring up that sketchy guy who was watching me at the gas station, and I asked my husband if there was a chance he did something to my car. My husband's tone suddenly changed to sounding more concerned and worried. He said, yes, there's a chance that he may have cut my fuel line. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was I needed to run. I took my keys out of the ignition and shut the door and locked it so that the headlights would turn off. My phone was on like 2%, so I told him to text me when he's close. I ran off the road and towards the first house I could find. I ran down the long driveway and up the property to the front door. All the lights in the house were off. I still rang the bell multiple times anyway. Eventually, a light turned on, and then the door opened. A man in his 60s opened the door. He looked like he was just woken up. I asked him to let me in to hide and charge my phone. After a bit of explaining, he opened the door fully and let me in. I asked him for an iPhone charger, and he said he'd go look for one, then asked me to take a seat in the living room. I sat down, still in my nurse scrubs, feeling a mix of emotions. The man called out from the kitchen asking me if I wanted some water. I said yes, please. Little did he know, I saw his reflection in a mirror in the living room that gave visibility into the kitchen. I saw him fill a cup with water. Then I know for a fact I saw him drop something into the water. He walked out of view of the mirror, but the faucet was still running. It ran for a solid 30 more seconds before he turned it off. He came back into the living room with a glass of water and handed it to me. I thanked him, and he sat down and just looked at me, then asked me to explain the situation again. I replied to him I just really needed a charger so that I could contact my husband. He said, "Oh right," and went upstairs. I checked my phone, and it was on 1%. I used that remaining battery to send my current location to my husband just in case. I then smelled the glass of water, and although it didn't smell like anything, I knew he put something in it. Now I had to make the decision of whether I should leave or not. On one hand, I needed to charge my phone badly. On the other, I was 99% sure he did something to this water. I heard him walking back down the stairs, and he said he doesn't have any iPhone chargers since he has an Android. After he said this, I got up and walked straight for the door. I'm not an idiot. Once outside, I ran back down the driveway to the road. I felt like throwing up. I couldn't believe 2 separate potential incidents from 2 different men happened in one night. I crept along the side of the road behind the trees. I took out my phone and sent my updated location, and right around now was when my battery died. I waited for until I saw familiar headlights of my husband's truck. I went out waving my arms, and thank God it was him. I got inside the truck and let all my emotions out, crying to him about what I just went through. He brought us to my car, and there was no longer a car behind mine. My back window was shattered though, and it appeared someone had gotten into the back seat, but nothing of high value was left in my car to steal anyway. My car battery was also now dead. When I told my husband about the man who tried to potentially roofie me, he was so furious he wanted to go break down his door, but I told him no, let's just wait for the tow truck to come. We waited quite a while before it came, and my car was towed to my dealership, where they would take the car in the next day. My husband was right. My car was vandalized and the fuel line was cut completely. Thank God I was off the next few days because I needed some time to mentally recover from this night. The idea that twice in one night I was almost a victim of some sketchy men, I just couldn't get over. This was something that happened so long ago that a lot of details are a little blurry. It's not like it happened yesterday. I'll try my best to fill in smaller details that I don't fully remember with how I best remember things played out. It was the last day of school. I was in the 4th grade. 4th grade was the last year in our elementary school where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would always be the one to pick me up. On the last day of school, my friend Dennis and I had a playdate planned to celebrate the last day of school. Dennis wasn't in my class this year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway from me. After school was over, we single file lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall, where we waited outside by our teacher, Miss Blue. I waited for Dennis's dad to appear from the crowd of parents shuffling in and out of the parking lot next to the doors. Then I heard my name. Tommy, Tommy. I look over and see a man waving at me as he approached. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went over to Miss Blue and said I'm being picked up. She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Dennis's uncle who waved at Miss Blue. Miss Blue dismissed me and I went with the man. He led us through the crowd and was a very quick and jittery talker, like he spoke fast and had a bit of a stutter. He was walking incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him with my backpack on. He explained to me that his brother, or Dennis's dad, was working later than expected, so he was driving me back. We got to his car, which was a dark red hatchback type car from what I remember, and it took me this long to acknowledge the giant elephant in the room. Where was Dennis? Why weren't we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said that Dennis was already at his house. I was shy around people I didn't know, especially adults, and I wasn't one to openly speak my mind if I was confused. But I was very confused. This was making less and less sense. The whole drive, the man kept yapping, telling stories of his days in elementary, asking me questions like what sports I played, what we're learning in class. If I had to guess, we were in the car for like 10 minutes, which honestly for our town where houses were right on top of each other, that was a while. My house was a 5-minute walk away from the school. We were definitely in an area I wasn't familiar with when he parked the car in front of his house. His house looked pretty normal to me from what I remember. He led us inside and shut the door and locked it behind us. It was really, really dark inside the place, and I realized why. All the curtains were shut. It almost felt like it was nighttime in there, especially because the only source of light was a dim lamp in the corner of the room. He then looked at me and smiled. I said, "Where's Dennis?" And he started acting really jittery and nervous seeming. He said something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." He then disappeared into a nearby room, and I heard a door open and then footsteps descending into a basement. I know my heart was already racing. I knew I was in danger. I went to the door to quietly try to open it, but I couldn't. It had some kind of lock that must have needed a key for. I really started to panic now, yet I still probably held out a little bit of hope that Dennis would be coming up those stairs. But I knew the chances of that were slim. I regretted entering that house. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the kitchen and found a phone hung on the wall. I picked it off the receiver and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was in a whisper, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They heard me, they acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room with 911 still on the line. I hurried back to where the man left me as I already heard his footsteps coming back upstairs. Then he called my name, saying, "Come down, Dennis is down here." Then there was a pause. He repeated my name, and when I didn't answer, he came up the stairs fully to look at me. He asked me if I was okay. I felt so sick, and I was so scared. I hated myself for walking into this situation and not being wiser. I asked in a very scared voice if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His fake, friendly smile disappeared as he realized that I was no longer falling for this. He walked closer to me in a gentle manner until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively, and he started pulling me towards the basement. I screamed and cried, and he screamed at me, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave." So I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me, and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to this empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. I don't know what he was doing, but I heard him walking around for a while. Then he came to the basement door, opened it, and he called down asking if I'm hungry. I replied no. I didn't want him going into the kitchen seeing the missing phone. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat down there, waiting, with my heart in my throat, and then I heard it. The doorbell ringing 3 times from upstairs, followed by banging sounds, which were definitely the sounds of police banging on the door. I would refrain from screaming until I heard the front door open, but I never heard the man's footsteps approach the door. The doorbell kept ringing and I kept hearing the bangs. This went on for some time, until I heard a really loud bang sound, and then multiple heavy footsteps and multiple screaming voices. I started screaming for help as loud as I could at the top of the stairs, banging on the door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer on the other side grabbed hold of me and hurried me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 of the cops outside as we waited for my parents to show up. The man from inside was brought outside and into a cop car in handcuffs, and that was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived on the scene, my mom was bawling her eyes out. There had already been a whole scene at the school as cops were called and Dennis's dad realized what happened. This man was a work associate of Dennis's father. When he somehow learned that Dennis's dad would be picking up Dennis and I from school on the last day, he seized the opportunity to do what he did. A complete sick fuck. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never really asked for more details because I try not to think about it. My mom went to counseling with me for months after this incident. Let's just say my parents didn't have kind words for Miss Blue, not verifying if I actually knew the person picking me up. If I didn't think to call the police before he basically threw me in that basement, I know for a fact I'd be dead right now. This was like 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know. It was junior year of high school, and it was the last day of school. A lot of people cut school this day or left early after lunch period. My friends and I were some of the latter. It was a stormy, dark day. A bunch of people from our grade originally planned to hit the beach on the last day of school, but that was obviously canceled. So my smaller core group of friends decided to do something else. There used to be an abandoned elementary school in town that hadn't been used for like 10 years. There were plans to tear it down by the year's end. So, still wanting to do something fun on the last day of school, we all agreed to break into the building and just fuck around exploring. There were no cameras in that old building, and on a stormy day, no one would be outside monitoring the place or anything, so we all left after lunch period. Our friend Eddie already had a car and his license, so he drove us all to the abandoned school. The school was in the middle of a neighborhood, not on any main roads or anything. There was a back parking lot covered by overgrown bushes and trees on one side, and the walls of the school on 2 other sides. It was a perfect spot to park and go unnoticed. The place wasn't boarded up or anything, it was just locked up. Eddie had a baseball bat in his trunk that he took out to smash one of the windows of the school. I was honestly so nervous that even through the pouring rain, one of the houses over the fence would hear the smashing sound. We all watched and nervously laughed as Eddie swung the bat into the window in front of the car, and after a few good swings, smashing it. He pushed away the stray pieces of glass stuck to the frame with the bat, and then he waved us over. We one by one climbed through the window into the school. My logic was that the school was being torn down anyway. What does a broken window matter? We all were inside the building now. The window we climbed through was actually one of the windows for a classroom. A lot of stuff was still left in the room, including the desks and some decorations on the walls. Based on the decorations, it looked like we were in a 4th or 5th grade classroom. It was very surreal to be inside of what was once an active classroom where little kids would come to learn. Now nothing but a cold, dark, and abandoned room collecting dust waiting to be destroyed. The sounds of thunder and lightning outside also added to the surreal feeling of it all. There were no lights on in the building. Power to the place was likely cut completely. We anticipated this though. The flashlights on our phones were plenty to get around and see. Even without them, it wasn't completely pitch black in there, as even though it was a dark day, some light was still creeping in through the windows and doors. We started traversing the hallways, going from room to room. Each classroom was still full of desks and chairs that hadn't been sat in probably a decade. We all 4 were in the same classroom, when there was a sound that echoed down the hallway and into the classroom. We all went silent and turned off our lights for a moment. After a flash of lightning, we slowly accepted that it was probably nothing, so we continued on. We just went from room to room as our wet shoes all squeaked on the floors. Sneaking around wasn't possible, really. A lot of things in the school were visibly decaying. You could really tell no one had stepped foot in there in ages. As we neared the corner of the hall, I turned around just to look back down the other way, and at the doorway of one of the classrooms, it looked like there was something sticking out from the classroom. I asked my friends to also look. Their lights would maybe help see what it was. When all four of us were pointing our phone flashlights toward the door, whatever that thing we were seeing was retracted into the classroom. All four of us quietly went "oh shit" amongst ourselves, and we started running down the intersecting hallway. We stopped when we were far enough away. It seemed we were in the kindergarten wing now. Then we heard another sound echo from down the hallway. It seemed we weren't alone. But who could be in here was the question. The place was locked up and every light in the building was off. The sound scared us into going into the first classroom we could find and shutting the door. It was indeed a kindergarten classroom. We were now concerned we'd get in trouble, so we waited in silence with our flashlights off. The rain was still coming down hard, and there was still thunder and lightning crashing every 20 seconds or so. Suddenly, the door to the classroom clicked open, and someone pushed it as it eerily creaked to a fully open position. We didn't see anyone at the doorway though, and the hallway was almost pitch black. We all tried our best to stay quiet, and then, slowly, something appeared through the doorway. It was the shape of a head. We all saw it, and when there was another flash of lightning, we saw what it was. It was in fact someone's head, looking into the classroom directly at us. I started apologizing for all of us, saying we're leaving. The person at the doorway didn't move. They motionlessly and almost lifelessly just peered around the doorway in the classroom. Eddie asked, "Do you work here?" No response. Eddie had a fuck this moment clearly. He handed me the bat as he struggled to unlock one of the windows to slide it open just enough to crawl through. He crawled out first, then my other two friends, and I was last. Before I crawled out, I looked back one more time at the head at the doorway. I crawled through as quickly as I could, fearing I'd hear the person run up behind me and grab my legs. Once I was out, I ran to catch up with my friends who were already booking it back to Eddie's car. We drove out of there in a hurry and never looked back. The building was torn down later that year and has since been turned into a park. We never got in trouble for breaking in. To this day, we have no idea if that was some kind of worker or just some random person. Either way, it was extremely creepy behavior on their part. When I was a freshman in college, I took a chemistry class. It was really difficult for me. The tables were arranged in groups of 4. I sat at a middle table at the left side all the way to the end. Next to me was a guy named Zach. He was very awkward. He gave me Reddit moderator vibes. To describe his appearance, he was like 5'8", he was a little overweight, and he had a really ugly, patchy beard. But he knew his stuff in chemistry. I think he was just good in school overall. We started to talk in a pretty cordial way when he noticed I sucked in class, and I would ask him for help. He started offering to do my homework for me, and he even let me cheat off him on tests. I never got any kind of flirtatious vibes from Zach, but that might have been because he was just too awkward to flirt in person. He eventually asked for my number so that he could send me homework-related stuff. Obviously, I gave it to him. He was helping me out a ton and didn't give off any threatening vibes. He just seemed a little reclusive. Fast forward to the last day of class, and Zach did something completely unexpected. He asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him after class. I had no physical attraction to Zach in the slightest, and our personalities were complete opposites. But he did help me throughout the semester maintain an A, so I had to let him down super politely. I lied and told him I'm going away to Miami for the next couple of weeks and won't be around. He right away responded, "What about when you get back?" I felt like 2 weeks was long enough of a gap in seeing each other where he would probably lose interest. So I said, "Yeah, I could be around," or something like that. He responded with a really cringy "cool" as he nodded his head in response. From here till the end of class that day was really awkward for me. After class, I left straight from my car and drove right home. I was a commuter, not a dormer, so after the last day of class was over, that was it. It was Thursday, and my other friends who went to the same school wanted to go out that night, so we hit town that night, and at some point, I got a text from Zach. He asked, "When are you going to Miami?" I told my friends all about Zach while we were drunk, how he got me an A, but now he wanted a date. My friends joked that I should just go on the date with him to be nice. I joked back sarcastically, "Yeah, for sure." I told myself I'd respond to it later, but I was drunk and completely forgot to. The next day, I woke up to 2 follow-up texts, one with question marks, and then the next one, "You're going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" So I replied, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was packing. I'm going to Miami today." He replied almost instantly saying, "Okay." Obviously there was no Miami trip, but he should have never found that out. Later that night, my girls and I went out again, and while out, I got a scary text from Zach saying, "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." I almost dropped my drink when I saw this. I showed it to my girls, and they were all freaked out just like I was. I replied to Zach, "What do you mean?" And he replied, "Nothing, forget it. I just don't like liars." I genuinely was scared that I was being stalked. I looked around the whole bar, but he wasn't there, at least as far as I knew. So what the hell? I just didn't answer. At that point, I never planned on answering him again. It wasn't until late that night, shortly after I got home, like literally taking my shoes off inside, that there were knocks at the door. It had to be like 1 a.m. I said, "Who is it?" And it was Zach on the other side. He said, "It's me." I wanted to scream. I was home alone. I yelled through the door to leave, or my dad will come out and kick your ass. That seemed to work, as he didn't knock again. I texted everyone I knew about the situation, my family, all my friends. I was horrified. Some suggested calling the police. I said I would go to the nearest station tomorrow, but tomorrow didn't even come yet, when I received a super long, disgustingly weird and creepy text from guess who? I was appalled when I picked up my phone and read it. This is what it said. "I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now after being used by someone for months and then lied to, and hurt and anger are 2 of them. I thought from the start of the semester in chemistry class that our chemistry was through the roof. No pun intended. I must say, I am hurt that you would make up something as elaborate as a 2-week-long Miami trip just to avoid going out with me, even after I stuck my neck out for you all semester and risked my own academic standing. I definitely have noticed the way you looked at me sometimes in class, and I can't pretend there wasn't a hint of interest there. All I'm asking for at this point is for 1 date. That's it. I'm not asking your hand at marriage, though I surely would be quite an ideal husband to have if I do say so myself. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you needed more time to think over the prospect of going on a date with me. I know how much I have to offer, much more than these losers all over campus. If you want, I can come back to your house and we could talk about it in person. I am only making this offer once. I'm just very crushed to feel like I wasted so much this semester for nothing in return. Yours truly, Zach." I sent this to everyone. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I called my dad until he picked up, and I told him how scared I was. After he read the text, he took it upon himself to send Zach a lengthy text of his own, and he attempted to call him like 10 times, but Zach is clearly too much of a coward to pick up that phone call. I also went to the police station the next day with the text saying I wanted to press charges, and one of the people working there said that Zach would be contacted. Zach never picked up any of the calls from the police who were trying to get him to come in for questioning, nor did he answer any of their text messages. Zach completely disappeared. I never heard from him again. Between the police contacting him and my dad's pretty scary texts and voicemails, that basement-dwelling creep probably was shitting himself. Luckily, I never saw him on campus again or anything like that. But I can say, I know what it's like to deal with an actual stalker. My parents own a vacation home in Quincy, California. It's a 2-acre property surrounded by woods. We would go there as a family all the time when my siblings and I were kids. Now that we're all adults, we don't really have aligning schedules to go together as a family anymore. But when I was in the early stages of talking to my girlfriend Rose, I told her about our vacation home on like our 5th date. In October, the leaves began transforming to create stunning natural beauty in Quincy. I teased the idea of us spending a weekend there together, and she right away said let's do it. 2 days later, we were packing our things getting ready for the road trip to Quincy. I picked her up from her house, and off we went. The drive there was about 5 hours. We passed the time talking about everything in life, from TV shows to family to childhood memories, and then we'd listen to comedians and podcasts to pass some more time. When we finally made it to Quincy, we drove through the cute little village first because I wanted to show her how nice it was there. 10 minutes later, we were at the house. We have a little wooden fence at the driveway that we leave closed whenever the place would be vacant. It doesn't have a lock or anything, it's just a little deterrent for people to not enter the property while we're there. I got out of the car to open it, and then we drove past it onto the property. My dad has landscapers come every couple weeks in the summertime into the fall, so the property was very well kept when we were there. Rose was impressed. We were there just in time for lunch, so we unpacked, I gave her a tour, and then I turned the hot tub on so that the water would be hot enough for later. Then we went into town to go to one of my favorite spots to eat. When we finished up, we did a little sightseeing and went to the Plumas County Museum. After that, it was starting to get dark out, so we headed back to the house. We relaxed in the hot tub for a while. The hot tub was on the back deck under the awning. It was really cold out, but it felt nice in the hot tub, until we both could hear the crushing of leaves nearby, like footsteps. We thought it was a bear, so we both jumped out of the hot tub and ran into the house. I turned off all the lights inside and outside, thinking the lights could be attracting a bear or some wild animal. I peeked out one of the windows, expecting to see a bear, but instead saw the silhouette of a human being walking along the side of the house. I ran to the back door to lock it and shut the blind on the back door window. I told Rose to be quiet. The footsteps circled the house until they got to the front door, then stopped. After a moment of silence, there was a knock at the door, and someone yelled, "It's the police." We were confused. I went to the front and said through the closed door, "Is there a problem?" The person on the other side said, "We got a breaking and entering call." I asked, "How's that possible? The nearest neighbor isn't for a quarter mile." There was a noticeable gap in his response. He said, "I just need you to open the door, sir." I responded, "Sorry, I don't feel comfortable doing that." I then thought to peep out the window and see if there's actually a cop car parked out front. I kinked the blind to the front just enough to see outside. It was twilight outside, dark but with enough brightness still to make out the property and see no police cars out there. I said to Rose, "I don't think that's a real cop." The man outside knocked on the door again. I said through the door, "I don't see a cop car out there, so I don't feel safe answering the door." The man didn't respond to anything to this. When there was another moment of silence, we thought he already walked away. A couple minutes passed and we were still in the living room talking to each other. Then heavy footsteps clomped away from the door. He'd been standing there still the whole time against our knowledge. I went over to peek out the window again, but I didn't see anyone. He must have walked off a different direction from the house. The scary thought was, the house is surrounded by woods. He could come from literally any direction. We were definitely not going back outside again that night, besides me going outside real quick to turn off the bubbles in the hot tub. And from there, we stayed in the bedroom watching movies and eventually went to sleep. I kept my dad's shotgun from the closet under the bed. The next day, we went hiking in Plumas National Forest. Then we went out to eat, and then we went to see a movie at the nearby theater. When we got back to the house, it was getting dark out. We pulled onto the property, and Rose screamed, "Oh my God," and I damn near swerved the car thinking I was about to hit something. I slammed on the brakes and said, "What?" She pointed at someone quickly walking away from the house towards the woods until they disappeared into the darkness. I tried to keep Rose calm when she started freaking out that someone's stalking us. I told her it's fine, we have a gun, and we're leaving tomorrow morning anyway. I was kind of scared too, though. I pulled the car as close as possible to the house, then we quickly went inside. I did a quick run around of the house, making sure every door and window was locked. We didn't go outside again that night. We packed our things to be ready in the morning, and then went to the bedroom for the rest of the night. After watching a movie, we went to sleep. Around that time, I started hearing this weird scraping sound coming from outside. It happened every few seconds, and then it would stop for a few seconds. I couldn't make out what it was, but something was going on out there. I feared that person may have came back. I waited until the noises stopped completely, before quietly getting out of bed to not wake up Rose. I walked to the window, kinked the blinds just a bit, and found myself face to face with a man on the other side of the window trying to look in. He definitely saw me. I fell backwards and screamed, "Jesus Christ." Rose woke up. I didn't say anything though. I grabbed the shotgun from under the bed and made sure it was loaded before running out the back door and shooting it into the air while screaming like a madman, trying to scare off that man and whoever else could have been out there. I think I fired 3 shells into the air before going back inside. Then I explained to Rose what happened. In a strange way, I felt a nice adrenaline rush after going outside and doing that. Maybe that was partly why I felt so confident that whoever was outside wasn't coming back. The adrenaline eventually wore off, and when we were back in bed, I was scared once again of hearing any kinds of sounds from outside. We made it through the night, and the next morning I did call the police just to file a report on the whole thing. My family and I have been back there a few times since this story, and thankfully that guy never came back, at least while we were there. I was driving through Colorado in the middle of the night. I was in Tabernash at this point, and it must have been like 1 a.m. I stopped to get some gas and grab a snack at a gas station. After that, I got straight back on the road. Though there weren't any cars on the road at this hour, especially not the roads I was on, I still obeyed the speed limit because it was late, I was tired, and you never know where a cop could be hiding. I was going around 55 on this winding road, and all of a sudden, that dreaded flashing of lights appeared in my rearview mirror. I looked in my mirror and saw the car behind me with the flashing white and red lights. So I pulled over, but not before looking at my speed and confirming that I was only going maybe 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. I pulled onto the side of the road, and so did the vehicle behind me. I was beyond annoyed. I'd never been pulled over before at the time, and I'm always a cautious and careful driver. I immediately felt like I was being pulled over unlawfully. As the officer stepped up to my car, I lowered the window, and he greeted me, asking for my license and registration. I tried to act like I know my rights and would not just bend over backwards for him. So I asked, "Is there a reason you pulled me over?" He said he'll get to that in a minute. I told him I know I wasn't speeding or swerving and none of my taillights are out, so I don't want to hand you my license if this is an unlawful stop. Then I took a look at his uniform. It looked off. He was in all black with a black vest on that resembled a police vest, but his vest didn't say police anywhere on it. His badge didn't say police either. It said Criminal Task Force. He kept insisting for my license and registration, and I actually just flat out asked him, "Are you an actual cop?" He replied, "I'm part of the undercover unit." Then he asked for my license again. I asked him for his badge number. He said he didn't have to give that to me. I knew enough about traffic stops to know that was a lie. I also took note that his lights were only red and white, lacking blue. I wasn't 100% sure if this could be an indicator of a fake police officer, but along with everything else, it only made it more suspicious. The man started asking me to get out of the car. I said, "Respectfully, I'm not comfortable talking to you until you can get a supervisor here." He raised the volume of his voice and his tone got more assertive as he repeated for me to get out of the car. I replied, "I don't think you're a real cop. If you are, you wouldn't have a problem getting your supervisor here." I rolled up the window a bit, and he didn't like this. He yelled at me to open the door as he put his hands on my window and tried unlocking the door. I pushed his hands off as I started the car and put it in drive. I heard him shout stop as I started flooring it away from him. My heart was racing, and by God, I was hoping I was right or I was going to jail. But at the same time, hoping I was right that this man was impersonating a cop showed just how terrifying of a situation I was in. As I was driving away going the speed limit, I saw the car behind me with the lights on fast approaching. I did the only thing I could think to do, and that was to call 911. I told her on the phone that I was being chased by someone who I believed to be a fake cop. I said he refused to give his badge number, his car was unmarked and didn't have blue lights, and his uniform didn't say police. After asking my location and more details on the situation, I told her that I was being chased by this person. The woman told me the nearest police station for my location, which was the Fraser Winter Park Police Department. She requested I go there, and she would be dispatching an officer to meet me there. The guy in his car was following me halfway to my destination with his lights still on, but suddenly when we got to an intersection, He turned his lights off and turned right, driving off out of view. He was gone, and with that, I realized that my suspicion was true the whole time. I was pulled over by a guy pretending to be a cop. I still drove to the police station, where there was a cop sitting in his car in the parking lot. I pulled in and he got out, seemingly knowing it was me that he was meeting right away. From there, I told him every last detail of the encounter, the guy's face, his car, and what intersection he turned right at. He took down my contact information, I'm guessing in case I'd need to be called in to identify the guy. After a few minutes, I was on my way. I'm glad I trusted my intuition and didn't get out of the car. I could only imagine where things would have went from there. I'm 29 years old. I live alone in my house in a small town in Michigan on the weekends. I come here to escape from the city lifestyle that I spent most of my life growing up in and am sick of. I like being in a quiet, rural area, but my house and property is the kind of place horror movies are usually set. A house with a big property and the neighbors not right on top of you. You don't hear of too much crime usually in my town, but that's because the population is relatively low. I don't have a lot of friends in the area, but that's not why I come here anyway. I come to be alone and escape my stresses from work and people in general during the week. One Friday, shortly after arriving at the house after my drive, I got a knock at the door. I opened it to a guy with a clipboard. Immediately, I knew he was selling something. He asked me if I was content with my security system. I said I don't have one, but I'm not really interested, and I made a joke that no one's breaking into this ugly house. He then went on his pitch, telling of all the recent break-ins in the area that, quite honestly, I had not heard about. He then asked who I live with, and I said I live alone, so I don't really need it. He was persistent, though. He asked me to at least give him my phone number, and he'd circle back in a couple of weeks to see how I'm feeling. He offered to waive the installation fee. On the spot, I figured why not, that actually sounded pretty good, so I gave him my number. He thanked me and left. After that, I went to the kitchen to start making dinner, and then I resumed watching Yellowstone in the living room. I was on a binge, so I was watching episode after episode for hours on the couch. It was at about 11 o'clock at night that there was a knock at the door. 11 o'clock at night is beyond the appropriate hour to knock on anyone's door, especially around here. I'm not super close with the neighbors, so I wouldn't assume it to be one of them. I ignored the knocking and kept watching my show. The knocks persisted though. I still didn't get up. I wasn't answering the door at 11 p.m., no way. I stayed seated. But when there was a third set of knocks at the door, I grew concerned. They weren't leaving. I went to the door to ask who's there. There wasn't a reply from the other side. This is exactly how a horror movie would start out. I wasn't going to open the door to find out who was on the other side. I said through the door, I'm not interested in whatever you're selling me. I have a gun that I'm not afraid to use. I don't actually have a gun, but it's an easy enough threat to get someone to go away. I thought that did the trick because the knock stopped. I went back to the couch. Then someone started calling my cell phone. The caller ID said 911 emergency services. I'd never received a call from 911 in my life, and I didn't even think that was a thing. I always thought that if the police called you, it would say no caller ID or something. I picked up the phone, and a man on the other line asked, "Is this George?" To which I said yes. He said, "This is the police department. We have officers outside your house right now. There's been a report of a crime on your block, and we have some questions to ask you." This didn't feel right at all. I asked the alleged 911 operator to ask the police to go to the windows so I could identify them before opening the door. He said he can't do that, they're already outside my house, which made no sense. I said, "I don't answer questions, sorry," and hung up the phone. Even if it were the real police, I had no legal obligation to answer the door anyway. But this was screaming trap in every sense of the word. They tried calling me again with the same number. I denied it and put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I actually decided to call 911 and ask if these calls are legitimate, and right away, the 911 operator said it's absolutely not real. And coupled with the fact that someone was at my door, they advised I lock all the doors, grab something I could use as a weapon, and wait inside until a police officer arrives at my house. While I was on the phone with her, I heard the back doorknob being shimmied with, and someone trying to push the door open. They then apparently tried ramming or kicking the door down because there were these super loud bangs on the back door. I told the operator this, and she said the police will be here in less than 10 minutes. I needed them now, though. I went to the door and screamed, "Do you want to get blown up?" And there was a yell on the other side saying, "It's the police, open up," followed by another ram or kick into the door. The back door is next to a window, unlike the front door. So I looked out the window, and I saw two masked men attempting to kick down my door. When I say mask, I mean they had these disturbing looking sacks on their heads. It looked like they had eye and mouth holes cut out. They saw me looking through the window, and I guess they saw me on the phone. They must have realized I was on the phone with the actual police, and they took off into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door from the actual police. I let them in. One of the cops was very helpful, and he went as far as to search my entire property. The two cop cars out front with their lights on for half an hour was surely a deterrent for anyone to come back to the house. After the cops left, I noticed one of the cop cars stayed in front of my house for hours. I'm sure they left at some point in the night. I'm done opening the door to anyone unannounced though, because I'm 99% sure that guy who was claiming to sell security systems was just scoping out the best house to target, and him and his squad were spoofing 911 calls to get people to open the door late at night. I went to my closest neighbors to ask them if the guy knocked on their doors too. They said no. For some reason, my house was the only one on this street targeted for this. I guess I was the first house they tried, and I seemed like an easy target. I'm not a big birthday celebrator. I'm not the type to make a big thing and invite all my friends out or throw a party. My close friends know this, so usually I'll do something more low-key with my family or close friends. One year in particular, after I went to dinner with my family, 3 of my friends were texting me trying to make plans to go out and do something. Not out to bars or anything, we were only 19 at the time and didn't have fake IDs. My friend Jay has a Jeep, so he suggested we go night off-roading on one of the trails about a half hour from our houses. It was this really huge state park that had trails big enough to off-road on. He had done it before. Technically, you're not allowed to, but past dark, nobody's in those woods. Since my birthday's in July, the days are really long. It doesn't get pitch black until around 9 o'clock, and I'd say that was around the time we started heading over to the park. My friend Carl brought a bunch of weed, and my other friend Joey brought a handle of vodka to celebrate my birthday. The plan was to hotbox the car in the middle of the woods and just get really fucked up. Jay wouldn't be partaking in the alcohol since he was driving. So past a certain hour, the entrance to the state park's parking lot would be coned off, but since there's no night security guards, it's easy to just get out and move one of the cones and drive around it. We just were on the lookout for any cops before entering the parking lot. Once we passed the entrance, there was a somewhat long stretch of a narrow one-way road with woods on either side, and then eventually it led to the big open parking lot, which also was surrounded by woods on 3 sides and then baseball fields and a playground on another. Jay knew exactly where to go to get to the trails, which were technically for walking, but they were plenty wide enough to drive on according to him. We made sure there were no cops sitting in the parking lot before entering the trail though. Once we were on the trail, Jay turned his brights on to have better visibility. Some parts of the trail were definitely very bumpy and tight, where he'd have to drive slowly to be sure not to scrape any trees or bushes on either side. The trails were not made for cars after all, so caution was necessary. But it was definitely fun at first, where the trail would open up or there would be drops. The bumpiness of the ride made it fun, almost like an amusement park ride. Carl lit up the joint he rolled and started passing it around. When we were deep enough into the trails, Jay stopped the engine and turned off the headlights. We sat in the car with the music playing and the bottle being passed around. The music was pretty loud too, so when all of us thought we heard something from outside, we genuinely went silent and looked at each other. Jay turned off the music, and we all said basically at the same time, "What was that?" or "Did you guys hear that?" We all agreed it sounded like a high-pitched screaming. Jay turned the headlights back on, but we didn't see anyone in front of us. Still, we wanted to move out of that immediate spot, so he drove a little further down the trail. Once we stopped again, we agreed it might have been a female fox we heard. From here on, we hung out with the music a bit lower, and we were just chilling making mixed drinks. At one point, my friends all sang me happy birthday really loudly as a joke. Eventually I had to go pee, So I just got out of the car and took a few steps off the trail into the woods. Midstream, I heard what I swore were footsteps nearby. I cut it short and went back into the car, telling my friends I heard footsteps. Jay turned on his headlights again, and he and I, being in the front seats, were the first ones to scream when we saw somebody standing about 10 feet in front of the car on the side of the trail. It was a woman with her hood up. We expected her to do something, but she just stood there. Jay rolled down his window and asked, "You all right?" The woman then backed slowly into the woods until she was out of sight. It was at this moment that Carl, in the back, somehow while zonked out of his mind, noticed something horrifying. I still remember the moment he said, "Guys, we're surrounded." And all of us started looking around in the woods, and there had to be at least 3 other people dressed in sweaters with the hoods up on different sides of the car, all looking at the car though. Mind you, this was not a cold night, it was the middle of July. They were all standing right off the trail in the woods. Carl in the back seat screamed, causing us to turn around and see a man standing right outside the back windshield looking in. The red glow from the taillights created this creepy red glow in the guy's deadpan expression. I screamed, "Get us out of here, just go," and Jay listened. He put the car in drive and went as fast as he possibly could over the various rocks and bumps in the trail. We were all freaking out, and the way off that trail took way too long. But when we finally reached the pavement again through another exit of the dirt trails, I know we were all relieved. Jay, the most sober out of all of us, told the rest of us who were either drunk or really high that we're going straight home. We've thought about whether those people were just a group of young adults hanging out deep in the woods like we were, but it wouldn't explain all of them just creepily staring at us, standing still, nor would it explain one of them standing directly outside the back windshield looking inside the car, or the fact that they were all wearing hoodies on a summer night. We also realized that scream-type noise we heard most likely wasn't a fox after all, and probably had something to do with them. Either way, off-roading in those woods at nighttime was never an idea we floated again. I'll never forget my little sister's 5th birthday, but not for a positive reason. It was at a tea room type place that did princess parties for kids' birthdays. I didn't want to participate in any of the activities or princess interactions since I was worried about people thinking I was a baby, like a typical tough 6th grader. Instead, I was playing on my DS in a chair in the hallway when a random woman approached me and asked, "Hey, you're Gloria's kid, right?" Gloria is my mom's name, so I told her, "Yeah." This lady tells me that she's my Aunt Sarah and that I was probably too little to remember the last time we saw each other. She started talking about how big I had gotten and asked how I was doing in school. I was pretty used to these kinds of interactions with relatives, so I didn't question it at all and gave the usual answers. Sarah then told me that she brought a large dollhouse as a birthday present and needed help carrying it out of her car. She told me that she also had brought another cake and offered me the first slice if I helped her. I was almost 12, so I was taught about creeps and the fact that this was an almost textbook kidnapping scenario. But like I said, these kinds of interactions were super common in my family. I also admit that I made the mistake of trusting Sarah more because she was a woman, so I agreed to help and followed Sarah out the back door. The car wasn't parked. It was still running with a man in the driver's seat. Sarah could tell that the man being there made me suspicious, so she quickly told me that that was my Uncle Dennis and started urging me to hurry with the dollhouse before the cake frosting melted. I got a bad gut feeling. Why hadn't she asked Dennis to help her carry the dollhouse in? And why did they keep the car running when there was plenty of empty spots to park in? I stood where I was and refused to move. Sarah's tone became much less friendly as she was now commanding me to come to the car. Sarah tried to tug my jacket sleeve, but I swatted her hand away and yelled at her to stop. She looked furious, and for a second I thought Dennis was about to step out of the car. Thankfully, we all heard my mom and aunt loudly yelling my name. Sarah jumped in the car, and she and Dennis both took off. I ran through the back door and met my mom and aunt halfway inside. I immediately told them what happened. My mom hugged me and told me she was so sorry and that everything would be okay, while my aunt told the tea room workers. They basically put the tea room into lockdown and had all the kids gather in one room to make sure no one else had gone missing. Thankfully, no one had. The police eventually came to speak to me about what had happened. I told them as much as I could about Sarah and Dennis. The police officers I spoke to promised me that they would get back to me and my mom if they found out anything new, but we never heard anything back from the police about Sarah or Dennis, or whatever their real names were. As far as we know, they've never been caught. I still have no idea how Sarah knew my mom's name. I just try to be grateful that I'm okay and avoid thinking about what would have happened to me if I hadn't listened to my gut and had followed Sarah to the trunk of her car. My uncle is really well off and has a really cool house on the water with a huge backyard and pool. So for my 21st birthday, he let me use the backyard to throw a big party since he was out of town for the month anyway. Since it was my 21st and I wanted to go crazy, I invited all my friends and told them to invite all of their friends, just as long as they bring their own beer. The party started at 8. My uncle had a surround sound speaker system in the yard that was perfect for parties. I just plugged my burner phone in and put on a music mix that was good for parties. I told everyone that I invited to stay out of the house though unless they were going to the bathroom. It was strictly a backyard party. I quickly realized there were more people than I was anticipating. Almost all of my friends who I invited showed up, with extra people accompanying them. And then on top of that, people I didn't even recognize were walking in groups together through the gates. I had to assume everyone here was invited by people who I invited. But when there were easily more than 80 people in the backyard, I started getting anxiety about the cleanup and potential damage I'd find tomorrow. I tried my best to keep an eye on who was going in and out of the house. It was a long night though, and being the birthday guy, I did get distracted often. The party got way more crowded before it started to slow down, and eventually police came and shut down the party because multiple neighbors complained. So I had to tell everyone to leave except for a select group of my friends. There were about 10 of us left outside by the pool, and these numbers dwindled down until it was just myself and my friend Rob. My uncle told me I can't have anyone sleep over, but honestly I didn't think it would hurt if only Rob stayed over. He was blackout drunk anyway, and would easily just pass out on the couch. I walked him inside, then went back outside to lock both gates, then locked the back door. By the time I got inside, Rob was already sprawled out on the couch in the living room. And anytime I'd attempt to talk to him asking if he's asleep already, he'd just make a half-effort groan sound. So I left him there. I checked the bathroom to make sure it wasn't too dirty, and minus a couple empty beer cans on the counter, it wasn't bad. The cleanup wasn't going to be too bad tomorrow with the help of Rob. I went upstairs planning to sleep in one of the many bedrooms, wondering why my uncle was so strict with no one staying over when there's literally 4 extra beds. The 2 fancy stairways in the giant foyer led up to an upstairs balcony that overlooks the foyer, and then a bunch of bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and another living area. I brushed my teeth with my finger in the upstairs bathroom and went right to sleep. I was drunk too, so I fell asleep with ease. I woke up about an hour later feeling really nauseous. I mixed way too many liquors. I had to run to the toilet to puke. After I puked, I walked back out into the upstairs balcony area, and I heard footsteps from down in the foyer. I walked over to the railing of the foyer balcony and looked down. I said, "Rob," and I saw a figure in the darkness below stop moving. I felt like I could see them looking up at me, but with how dark it was in the house, I couldn't see the person's face or any features. I then heard something from the living room downstairs. The sound of snoring. It just dawned on me that the person in the foyer wasn't Rob. I said, "Who is that?" thinking maybe it was just another party guest who maybe passed out somewhere drunk earlier, but they didn't answer. I heard more footsteps from the kitchen area downstairs. My heart started pounding now. I said, "I'm going back to sleep," pretending like I thought they were just party guests, when in reality I was going back to the bedroom to lock the door and call 911 right away. But then I remembered Rob was down there. I had to try to warn him. I called his number and someone picked up. Before saying anything, I said Rob at least 3 times. All I heard was breathing on the other end. I hung up the phone and dialed 911 now, and while on the phone and whispering to the 911 operator, the doorknob to the door twisted around, and then there was a light knock on the door. I asked the operator in a whisper if I should say I'm on the phone with the police, and he said no, don't announce my presence. I asked what about my friend Rob, and he paused for a second as if he didn't know what to tell me. Then he said just wait in the room until police arrive. If they think my friend is asleep, they probably wouldn't harm him. I could tell even the operator didn't really know what to do about that, but I figured that was the best option too. At this point, all I could do was wait in the locked room, waiting out the intruders until the police got there. The operator told me police were arriving now, and that they would try the front and back doors. The police were able to enter through the back door, which was left open by whoever the intruders were. Only then was I instructed to go downstairs and meet them. I woke up Rob and explained everything to the police while he listened, still drunk and confused. I searched the house seeing if anything was missing, but it wasn't my house, so I didn't really know what was there beforehand. My uncle's bedroom was locked, and he didn't have many valuables just sitting out in the open. The police searched the entire house before leaving. They said they'd keep an officer on the block for the night, which made me feel a little better. I never told my uncle about this until one day he asked where his Cartier watch was. Apparently it was stolen right from the kitchen drawer by one of the intruders. It was then that I had to tell him the truth, and obviously he was anything but happy. He never asked me to reimburse him for the watch, but he also never allowed me to throw any kinds of events at his house again, and I can't blame him for that. 4 years ago, I took my youngest sister and her 2 friends trick-or-treating. I'm 18 now. I was obviously 14 during the time of this story, and my youngest sister was only 7 at the time, along with her 2 friends, who, of the 2, I'll only name one, Mary, for privacy reasons. I didn't have plans anyway, so I guess I was actually a bit happy that my parents made me walk with them. Plus, I low-key told my sister to fill an extra bag for me at each house. By now, we were more than a mile away from my house. The girls' bags were all pretty full now, and I was ordering them to start making their loop back in the direction of our house. The girls were approaching the front door of a corner house across the street from an old, closed-off community park. The house already stood out from the rest on the block in that there was a 3-foot wooden fence surrounding the perimeter, except for the walkway and driveway, and a bunch of overgrown trees and bushes on the front lawn, almost completely blocking the actual house from view. They tried looking for the doorbell, but then called back to me that there wasn't one. I answered back, telling them to just knock on the door. My sister pounded on the door in 3 different intervals. Then I called for them to skip this house. As the 3 girls were walking down the stoop, the front door to the house creaked open, and somebody could just barely be seen poking their head out from behind the door, which was open just a crack. The girls walked back up the stoop and simultaneously yelled "trick or treat." From the sidewalk, all I could see was an arm reach out from around the door, and then the person's pointer finger lifting up as if to say 1 second. The arm kind of creepily pulled back into the house. My view of it not seeing a body made the situation really eerie. The door closed, and for what felt like 20 seconds, they just stood there on the stoop. I was about to ask them what was going on, but once again the front door to the house cracked open. Once again, just an arm came into view for me. This time I could see him waving the girls to come into the house with his hand. My sister and her 2 friends were actually making their way into the house before even looking back at me for approval. At this point, the feeling in my stomach told me something wasn't right here, and I yelled to the girls to come back. The really disturbing part was as soon as I yelled this, the person shut the front door, almost slamming it in their faces. The 3 girls came back over to me. I told them that was enough trick-or-treating for the night. I nudged them to continue walking forward, keeping my eyes on the house. Barely through the overgrown bushes in front of the house, I saw the blinds to one of the front windows rustling around, and an older man sitting by the window. We continued walking home now. The girls told me the man initially said, "1 second while I go get the candy," and then shut the door. When he came back out, he whispered to come inside to get the candy. I was considering calling the cops and reporting this guy, but I wanted to get home and see what my parents had to say first. We were probably halfway down the block when I turned around and saw a person standing by the corner of the block right where the house was. We made it back to our house where I told my parents. They called my sister's friend's parents, and when they got there, we all had a long conversation about it. We then all drove over to the house in separate cars, with my mom talking with the 911 operator in the car. When we got to the house, we learned before the cops even arrived by a neighbor that the house had been vacant for months. Mary's dad was the quickest one to realize what was actually going on here. A sexual predator, or maybe even worse, was hiding in the house for Halloween, waiting to lure unsuspecting kids into the house to snatch them. And what scares me the most to this day was that my sister and her friends were about to enter that house before I told them not to. Halloween can be a very dangerous holiday. Two years ago, I was home on Halloween, and for the most part, it was a pretty normal day. Since Halloween was on a Friday, all of my friends were out partying. However, I was doing homework. Not one of my most exciting nights, but I didn't mind too much. I really had to get this homework done anyway. My mom and dad were handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters as they usually do. My house doesn't usually get many because we're pretty much the only house on the block that hands out, so it's often ignored because it's not worth their time. Tonight was no exception. Later that night, my mom calls me down and tells me to watch the door for trick-or-treaters because my neighbors had come over asking for help with their costumes for a party. So my neighbors and my parents both went upstairs to work on the costumes, leaving me alone downstairs. It didn't bother me because I had finished my homework and I could just play my PS4 while listening for knocks on the front door, which was close by. Only a couple more trick-or-treaters came in about an hour. Pretty typical for this area. However, around 11 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was pretty weird since it had almost been an hour since the last knock and it was pretty late for trick-or-treaters to still be out. Regardless, I grabbed the candy and went to answer the door. It's important to note that there's a small room in between the front door and the living room. When we answer the front door, we make sure to lock the door behind us leading to the living room so our dogs don't run up and start barking and whatnot. I did the same thing here. When I answered the door, there was a surprisingly large man, at least 6 foot 3 inches tall with a somewhat muscular physique, standing in front of me wearing a Michael Myers costume. Not a cheap one either, it looked pretty expensive for a costume. He stood in front of me but didn't say a single word. I thought it was pretty unusual because it's kind of customary to say trick or treat. But nope, he didn't do a thing but stare at me. It was almost like he was a statue. I thought he was really trying to sell the character and creep me out, and it was working. I was feeling a little intimidated because I'm pretty small for a guy, only about 5 feet 10 inches tall. I decided to break the awkward silence and say trick or treat for him while handing him some candy. I couldn't believe what he did next. In response to me handing him candy, he took a few steps into my house. This was when I started getting really uncomfortable. You're supposed to take the candy, say thank you, and go. It's like an unspoken rule that you don't walk into people's houses without permission. It was at this moment that I also noticed that he didn't have any type of bag for candy. This was a huge red flag, because I realized then that he was not there to trick or treat. Before I could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled something out. I didn't want to look at it, but I was assuming it was a weapon, and I had no idea what to do. I'd locked myself into a small room with a psychopath much larger than me holding a weapon, blocking the only exits. We all like to pretend and make up scenarios in our heads where we have to be the hero and save the day, but here I was, stuck in a real-life situation, completely unable to move, not able to save myself. I was frozen in fear. It was such a weird feeling, almost like I was dreaming the entire thing. I had no control over my body. And what a cliche way of dying I thought it would be, getting stabbed to death by someone dressed up as Michael Myers on Halloween. Thankfully it didn't go like that, because without warning, the guy takes off his mask and jokingly says, "I'm just messing with you, bro." I'm still frozen in shock and can't respond in any way. He then says, "I scared you though, right?" Completely confused and still afraid, I managed to respond with, "Yeah, you got me." He put the knife back in his pocket, which gave me a huge sign of relief, and said, "I didn't really come here to trick or treat, but can I have that candy anyway? I'm really hungry." I didn't hesitate to give him the candy because he creeped me out, and he still did have a knife. He then goes on to mention how he just left his friend's Halloween party and he saw my lights on and decided to prank me. It was obvious that he was drunk and high and thought knocking on someone's house pretending to be Michael Myers qualifies as a good prank. He mentions how he owns a tattoo place about an hour away from here, and even says that I'm pretty chill and that we should hang out sometime. He tells me to put his name and number in my phone so we could chill soon. I make sure to take his name and number down. After all, the last thing I wanted to do was upset this weird guy still blocking my only exit with a knife. I basically agreed to everything he said because I was still terrified and just wanted the conversation to end as soon as possible. But this conversation seemed to go on for hours. Despite this, I still didn't feel comfortable or safe. I had to find a way to get this guy out of my house. There was something way off about him, and I got vibes that he was a dangerous person. So I decided to make up a bullshit lie and say that I had something cooking in the oven that I needed to check on and that I'd text him later. And it worked. He said okay and turned around to leave my house. I could not close and lock the door quick enough when he left. My heart was still beating so fast that I thought it was going to burst from my chest. That was easily the most terrifying and weirdest experience of my life. I decided to not contact the police though, since the guy didn't have any malicious intent. I guess he was just completely out of it and just a overall really creepy person. I still have his number to this day, but we've never texted or called each other, just the way I'd like it. As terrifying as that situation was, I can laugh at it now and use it as an interesting story to share with my friends, so I guess one good thing did come from it. Just be careful who you open your door for on Halloween. There's some very weird and messed up people out there. I got lucky this guy wasn't a complete psychopath, because nothing was stopping him from stabbing me. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday, but ever since one not-so-sweet round of trick-or-treating, I've kind of switched over to liking Christmas the most. 2006, I was 14 years old. Me and Johnny, my best friend at the time, were going trick-or-treating together. I remember it was a Tuesday night, so everyone had school the next day. That meant the craziness with the teenagers going around with TP and shaving cream wasn't as extreme, nor was anything really. My parents wanted me back by 11 o'clock the latest, same with Johnny. It was around 8:30, I would constantly check my wristwatch. We were down a bunch of blocks close to the woods and the highway by the east end of town. This would likely be our last year of trick-or-treating, so we were trying to get as much candy as possible. We rang doorbell after doorbell. As the night wore on and the amount of kids outside lessened, the number of people answering their doors also decreased. Then it started to drizzle, and that's when it really became a ghost town outside. But that didn't stop us. We were now 3 houses down from the house that was commonly known around there as Hell House. It was nicknamed this because of the alleged murder that happened inside decades ago, plus the fact that the house looked like it was built over 100 years ago and stuck out from the other houses 2 miles away. There was even a whole webpage dedicated to the house with a little lore behind it. I don't really remember the full details anymore. The website is down now, but at the time nobody seemed to know if anybody lived there or not. At the time I was sure the neighbors knew, but we didn't live very close to the house. Long story short, me and Johnny were feeling brave and cocky, so we hopped the creepy fence surrounding the seemingly abandoned property and walked up to the stoop, which was made out of ancient and worn-out looking red bricks. We knocked on the door a few times since there was no doorbell. The drizzle turned to rain, and we suddenly didn't want to move out from under the front awning. Johnny jokingly knocked on the door again, but my focus was shifted to walking home in this rain. Suddenly, a loud thud made us both jump. Johnny said it sounded like it came from a window upstairs, to which I replied, "Let's leave." We walked quickly back down the red brick pathway, hopped over the front black graveyard-like gate, and stopped to look back at the house on this dark, rainy Halloween night. Johnny bumped me on the shoulder and pointed to the upper middle window of the house. And I felt like my heart dropped from my chest when I saw somebody clear as day staring down at us. Only there was something so disturbing about this person's face. I couldn't tell what it was through the rain and foggy window, but I swear that face and just this whole scene seemed like something you would see in a horror movie. We both jumped once again when the person at the window quickly and aggressively turned and seemingly ran away from the window. All we could assume was that they were coming outside after us. We quickly went to hide by the neighbor's fence, which was facing the backyard of the house. The sound of the rain thankfully masked the sound of our breathing and whispering. This neighboring fence was made of wood and had a bunch of holes, allowing us to peek through to the lawn next door. Suddenly, the entire fence started to shake a little, yet we couldn't see anyone on the other side, and we were certain it wasn't us who had done it. Johnny and I agreed it was time to make a run for it back to my house. We both stood up, and when we turned to run, I saw something at the edge of the fence. At first I was confused as to what it was due to the darkness. But it soon hit me that this was a person leaning over to this side of the fence, exposing their body down to their waistline with one arm reaching around the fence. The way this person was positioned and staring at us made for a horrifying scene and memory. We dropped our candy bags and ran for it. After running 5 blocks and my getting a few cuts and bruises from tripping twice in the rain, we got back to my house. We agreed not to say a word given that what we did could probably get us in trouble. The really scary part is the next day after school, we went to go ask some of the neighbors over there if they knew who lived there, and they all gave the same response. They had no idea if anybody lived there or not. They never saw a car in the driveway or anybody outside. One of the neighbors even pointed out that the house had a for sale sign very briefly a few months prior, but disappeared within a few days. We told all of the neighbors our story, and they were all very disturbed by the news. I moved out of that neighborhood in 2007 the next year, and I've never had to worry about the story behind that house or who was living there since. All I know is something strange was going on inside of that house, and I kind of wish I found out what. It was July 4th, 2007. I was 16 years old, and I had nothing to do for the night. My older sister Alicia, who has 9 years on me, was going to some huge party upstate. I think it was referred to as the Rockaway Bomb Show, where a bunch of young, out-of-college adults would go to drink and go crazy. Surprisingly, when I told my sister that I had no plans, she invited me to come with her and her boyfriend Alex. Now, I was a shy kid, so maybe that's why she was inviting me, to help me break out of my shell. But being 16 years old, it was definitely out of my comfort zone to go attend some crazy drinking party full of 20-year-olds. Somehow though, she guilted me into going. We'd have to stay at a motel overnight there, so I packed my stuff, and within 2 hours, Alicia was honking the horn outside. It was a long drive, close to 4 hours. By the time we arrived, the sky was already turning that bright orange as the sun was setting. We pulled into some sketchy looking road with a sign that said "Fireworks Show This Way." I rolled down the window and already heard a huge crowd of people in the distance. As we passed the tree lines on either side into the clearing, we could see a transportable stage, a bunch of tables scattered everywhere, and a food and drink bar. People in their low 20s everywhere, all holding beers or other alcoholic beverages. I felt my heart sink a little in social nervousness. Alicia parked the car on the grass because really there was no parking lot and the parking was basically a free-for-all. I followed Alicia and Alex to the party, and they immediately coincidentally found some of their friends who already seemed drunk. They introduced me and we chatted for a bit. Alicia handed me a beer, which I nervously accepted. As soon as I took the first sip, I started getting weird stares from people. I was afraid someone would ask me how old I am. I continued to cling on to Alicia and Alex for another 15 minutes before they both split up and started talking to random people. At that moment, I felt alone and awkward. In the middle of hundreds of college students and graduates all conversing with each other, and here I was, an awkward middle school looking 16-year-old with a beer in his hands all alone. A hand grabbed my shoulder and I turned, thinking it was Alex or Alicia, but it was rather some older guy. I mean like out of place old. The guy was like in his 40s or 50s, he had a balding head and glasses, he looked like he could be a creepy priest. He then took the beer out of my hand and said, "How old are you?" That hit me hard in the stomach as I choked up for words. I was actually just getting that from my sister. He put the beer on a nearby table and asked me what my name is. I, still thinking this guy was a worker at the show or something, told him Jake. Then he asked me who I'm here with, and I responded, "My sister, like I just told you." Eventually, I talked my way away from the guy and looked for Alicia or Alex. There were so many people here though, and I didn't have a cell phone back then, so I couldn't even text or call them. It got to a point where I felt so alone and awkward that I wandered away from the party and into the woods. I sat on a log, reflecting on myself and regretting my decision to come, when all of a sudden I heard a huge boom, followed by a roar of cheering. The fireworks show had started. I could actually see perfectly fine from where I was sitting, so I decided I'd just stay there. My mind was sucked into the beauty of the fireworks blowing up in the sky. So much so that I forgot about how upset I was. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Something was wrapped around my mouth and nose. I struggled. I tried to scream and break free. I felt like I was becoming lightheaded. I looked up for anything on the ground to use as a weapon and pulled up a big stick. I tried swinging at the person's leg, but it didn't work. The person pulled me down to the ground and pinned me on my stomach. As a final attempt, I grabbed a big stone from in front of me, and with a single, lucky swing, I struck the person straight in the face. They let loose their grip and let out a grunt, giving me enough time to get up and run. I did take one glance at the person, however, and could see that they were wearing the same thing that the man I saw earlier had been. I ran back to the party where they were shooting off the fireworks and asked the apparent hosts of the party if they knew the man. They said they hadn't. I told them what happened, and one of the guys was like, "Holy shit, buddy, yeah, we're gonna report this." By the end of the night, when my sister and her boyfriend were too drunk to drive, I ended up driving to the motel. I never told anyone in my family about the incident out of embarrassment, but that's something I kind of regret now. My name is Ivan, I'm 15 years old, and this is the scariest experience of my life. So it's the 4th of July, 2015. I live in a calm suburban neighborhood that's usually very quiet, but one night it all changed. My dad had to work extra late since he was covering someone's shift, and my mom was at some friend's house party. This was a Friday night, so I would usually just play games on my computer and talk with friends, basically having my kind of fun. I would do that every single Friday night without any issues. The time was about 9 or 10 p.m. and I was playing my favorite game, League of Legends, talking with some friends, when suddenly I heard a window shut. Or maybe it was something else. I thought it may be the broken dishwasher we had that sounded very loud. I ignored it and wanted to get back to my game, so I increased the volume on my headset. The sound echoed so loud that I could almost hear it with the volume on 96%. I had enough and wanted to see what it was, so I reduced the volume and told my friends to hold on and that I would be right back. The sound wasn't from the dishwasher or the dryer. It wasn't a window either. The sound was still underway though when I came to look what it was. The basement. I had never gone in there since we moved in, and my parents told me to never go down there by myself. Not for suspense reasons or anything like that, but they actually just don't want me going down there moving around any boxes. The basement was dirty, and the door was kind of broken and always gave out creepy drafts when it was open. I went to the basement door and listened. The sound went on for a good 2 minutes before silence. My whole body was actually filled with joy and happiness. But before I could even breathe out and go to my room calmly, the sound started again. First quietly, and then louder and louder and louder. I was completely home alone if you're wondering. No parents, no pets, no babysitters, nothing. I didn't even have any weapons to defend myself either. I was so scared that I started having thoughts about my entire life as if it were flashing before my eyes, so completely sure I was going to pass out or even die. Now the sound was very loud. I went straight to my room and closed and locked the door very quietly. I took my phone and dialed my mom's number. She told me to call the police, which suddenly seemed like a better idea. I called the police, and as I was on the line with the operator, I heard a door opening from all the way downstairs. Because it was so loud, I knew that it was the basement door. The operator told me that they would be over as soon as they could. It was at that moment that the horrific truth hit me. Somebody was in my house. I listened in silence for a few minutes, other than the occasional firework booming in the distance from the outside, as I heard somebody rummaging through our kitchen and living room. I wrote to my friends in the chat, "There's a fucking intruder in my house." Before I could even see what they responded with, I heard footsteps coming upstairs. Thinking on my feet, I opened the window and jumped down 2 stories onto the grass, breaking my left ankle. I was crawling as far as I could away from the window, and when I looked up to the window, I saw him. The most disturbing face which has ever belonged to a man. A crooked mouth, brown, wiry hair, and eyes so dark I couldn't even see them. But I could only see it for a few moments before he turned and walked away from the window. The sounds of cop cars stopping nearby was the greatest thing ever at that moment. I remember watching the police walking the man out to the car in cuffs, and I'll never forget that face, which looked even more horrific up close as he gave me an evil, hateful stare before being driven off in the backseat of that police car. It was the 4th of July, 2 days after my birthday. We live in a very quiet town in New Jersey, so not much was going on. I had just turned 21, so my girlfriend, who had already been 21 for a while, jokingly decided to come over to my house with a couple 6-packs and some fireworks for the holiday. My parents were at one of the neighbors' parties far down the road. We don't have a lot of close-by neighbors. My girlfriend's name is Sophia. When she arrived, we headed to the backyard, where we started drinking the 6-packs together. She brought 2 big firework missiles, a couple bottle rockets, and some firecrackers. Obviously, the missiles were what caught my eye the most. When I finished my second beer, I got off the deck to shoot off the 2 bottle rockets. Up next were the firecrackers. After lighting up the firecrackers, however, I noticed my garage was open all the way across the yard. I told Sophia I'd be right back and walked over to it. I went inside and turned on the light. Every drawer and every closet door had been opened. I called my dad first thing and let him know somebody broke into the garage and possibly robbed us. He had a typical reaction. "Are you serious? Aw, shit. What did they take?" "I don't know," I told him. "Alright, hang tight, I'll be home in a sec to check it out." So my dad was momentarily leaving the party down the block to come check it out. When I got back to the deck, I told Sophia, and she was just in shock. She went to go look herself, and when she came back, we just sat there outside on the backyard deck, waiting. Eventually, I decided to just shoot off the big missiles anyway. I couldn't wait anymore, and it was July 4th after all. Sophia told me to go for it. The first missile was huge. It practically lit up the whole backyard for a second. I loved it. But I knew these 2 missiles were not cheap, so I thanked Sophia again. I lit the second missile, and during those initial few seconds as the fuse was burning, me and Sophia both heard a large branch snapping on the ground from the woods. We both looked in that direction, and as the rocket exploded in the sky, it provided just enough light to see a figure in the woods facing us. We both screamed simultaneously, just in time for my dad to hear. Me and my dad both chased in that direction into the woods, but we couldn't see or hear anything. We completely lost the person. Later that night, we turned on the security camera in the garage that we hadn't used in a long time. At maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, when I was finally going to bed, I looked out my window for the heck of it, and the garage light was on. Me and my dad went to check it out. This time the entire garage had been completely trashed and some of my dad's expensive tools were missing. We went back to the house to check the surveillance footage, and we were disturbed. In the footage, the lights turned on, but the camera was blocked by something. It seemed like a piece of paper. We rushed back to the garage to check it out, and found a simple post-it note taken from the desk in the garage, stamped onto the camera. And in writing on the notes were the words, "Happy Independence Day, fuck you." We never found the robber.